afternoon, everyone. It's really great to have so many people here to attend this, which is our third annual Disability Inclusion Summit. I'm Carolyn Pepper. I'm the partner and a co-chair of the Leaders Group, which is our business inclusion group here at Reed Smith. Welcome to you all. We're also privileged to have some friends and supporters who've been with us right from the beginning of our Leaders Group here today in our London office. So thank you very much all for attending. So we hold this summit annually to celebrate the International Day of Persons with Disabilities on the 3rd of December. But this year we've got another reason to celebrate. We're extremely proud to say that this year marks the 10-year anniversary of Leaders. We began in 2012 with just a handful of people who thought, well, perhaps we could do a little bit better in terms of disability inclusion. But since then, we've grown from that handful of people to a community of more than 213 members around the globe. We've also joined in our colleagues from Asia, who you'll be hearing something from later today. And we're continuing to grow. We had, I think, more than 50 new members this year of Leaders, which is fantastic news. Our initial focus was really on recruitment, and that obviously continues to be a focus for us. But of course, it's not enough to just recruit people with disabilities. We have to make sure that our environments and culture are the very best they can be in order to support our colleagues with disabilities along their career journeys and to allow everyone to achieve their career aspirations and achieve what they're capable of and what they want to achieve. We have to continue to grow and improve. There's a lot more to do. To that end, I think one of the things that we've seen over the last 10 years is it's great to see so many younger people really pushing us hard to do better and to make the workplaces of the future as inclusive as they can be going forward. So this summit is a summit organised by people with disabilities, for people with disabilities and their allies, whatever profession or firm they work in. And I think that there's an expression which I've heard Jane Burton use a few times, no conversation about us without us. And I think this is really the epitome of that, because this is absolutely organised by people with disabilities here. And I'm sure when you hear the programme, you'll see what a fantastic job has been done here. The topics have been chosen today by people with disabilities to listen so that they can hear what they want to hear and to discuss the issues that are really important to people with disabilities. And what we want to do today, given that this is our 10-year anniversary, is to both reflect on the past, present, and the future for people with disabilities in the workplace. And we've tried to reflect that and tried to do that with the three panels we've got today. So before we begin with our jam-packed agenda, I want to share with you a brief video that's been made by our Leaders members, sharing their thoughts on DE&I.
Change can only happen if we can make it a conscious choice in our thinking and actions.
DE&I is not just something we think about for one day, but instead should be integrated in the way we think and act on a holistic basis, whether that is with colleagues, clients, or within the industry, an evolving conversation.
It's been 10 years since Reed Smith's Disability Diversity Group was formed. Leaders creators saw potential in people with disabilities who could excel regardless of their chosen fields or profession. There can be profound impact if importance is given to having evolving conversations that bring about new ideas. We should all seek to embrace diversity, equality, and inclusion as a state of mind.
It's important that people understand how best to support colleagues with different disabilities and talents and those who work differently. We at Reed Smith do not pretend to have all of the answers and solutions, but we're willing to try to figure it out as we go along the way. In our experience, this is what leads to progress and learning. We've learned there's a vast talent pool out there of individuals with disabilities. We welcome and value diverse talent by focusing on ability as opposed to disability.
Open minds lead to open doors. We all need to collaborate and work together and be the facilitators of change by developing an inclusive culture and mindset. There has been a growing realisation of the long-term benefits of embracing diverse talent and investing in disability, diversity, equity and inclusion. However, there is more to be done to improve disability diversity and disability empowerment.
Disability advocacy and the role of affinity groups are paramount to furthering the disability agenda. we need to appreciate intersectionality. Embracing and accepting people as they are is fundamental to creating an inclusive culture.
Disability accessibility does not only mean physical or digital accessibility, but also mental accessibility. It is important to have the willingness to adapt, and while we don't always get it right, we must endeavor to do our best to do so. The biggest challenge is to change mindsets, perceptions, and perspectives. Often, a bit of imagination, consideration, and innovation will help to overcome challenges and ensure long-term benefits for everyone.
It is important to be as open and honest as possible to create a supportive environment where people feel safe to identify as having a disability and to discuss any concerns they may have. This will encourage conversations and allow ideas to develop that can help support our colleagues, create allies, and catalyse improvements to values, systems, and practices. We need to reframe how people think about ability.
We believe our journey over the last 10 years has fostered hope and optimism for the future, but we know there is still work to be done. We hope that the groundwork being built now will create a more open and accepting environment for the future.
Reed Smith has worked hard to create an environment where people with disabilities can grow and develop. People with disabilities are an asset to any business or organization, and we need to create an open and supportive environment where people can thrive. Reed Smith welcomes diverse talent and strives to become the firm of choice for current and future industry leaders. So together, we can all rise to achieve the careers which reflect our talents and our interests.
Thank you very much. So I'd now like to hand over to our keynote speakers who are going to speak to us about an area which has been a key focus for us this year, namely the importance of ESG and digital accessibility for DE&I. So I'm going to hand over to one of our partners, David Boucher, who's going to start the conversation.
Sorry, it would help if I turn the microphone on. Hello. Yeah, good afternoon, evening, morning, whatever. I'm a corporate partner at Reed Smith. In addition, I'm on the board of something called the Global Business Coalition for Education, and I'm also on the board of something called the Global Partnership for Education, which is the fund within the World Bank that finances education projects around the world. And in that role, I represent the private sector. So I'm dealing with companies around the world on education, but more recently through their ESG strategy. And of course, it's interesting doing that now as both ESG is evolving and the regulatory framework around ESG, environmental, social governance issues, is evolving. I want to highlight developing and focusing on opportunities for people with disabilities as an intrinsic part of a company's ESG strategy. And some of my observations as I'm dealing with companies as they develop those strategies. And it's significant, I think, that that's happening now, as Carolyn says, as Reed Smith Disability Inclusion Group Leaders celebrates its 10th anniversary. I also want to connect this process and development with digital accessibility. This is how we can actually see it happen and how we make what we say about disability sustainable. So I'm delighted that we have Steve Agnoli, Reed Smith's Information Officer, to say something about that after me. And then finally, but certainly not least, you'll hear from Angie Matney, who you saw on the video just now, who's a counsel in our Washington, DC office, who can tell us about using and working day to day with digital accessibility. But first, I want to say something briefly about diversity, equity, and inclusion generally. and the perception of some people that this is somehow contradictory or works against an ESG strategy, or perhaps is an alternative to it. It does not, and it is not. Diversity, equity, and inclusion has to be hardwired or woven into everything we do, but particularly ESG. It cuts across almost every social, the S, the governance, the G in ESG, and is critical to achieving a holistic approach to ESG and making sure diversity, equity, and inclusion is enshrined within SG helps achieve true sustainability. ESG should build on and strengthen diversity, equity, and inclusion. And ESG is not an alternative to corporate and social responsibility and should not be about rebranding CSR. Those companies at the forefront of achieving ESG goals are those that enshrine those goals into the achievement of their commercial goals and strategy. That means integrating ESG themes with commercial goals. For example, aligning business drivers with ESG values. And what do I mean by that? Well, there are a whole range, of course, of business goals, but for example, increasing revenue by getting preferential access to markets and resources through community access of disability, minimizing fines and reducing regulatory risks. ESG regulation, as I say, is evolving, but will include disability as part of the wider diversity, equity, inclusion parameters. Improving employee productivity by attracting and retaining top talent and tapping into employee motivation and creating and creativity through focusing on people with disabilities. Enhancing returns by investing in accessibility, digital and otherwise. Aligning equality for people with disabilities with the governance part of ESG throughout the organization. So like diversity, equity, and inclusion, ESG has to be hardwired into a company's commercial strategy. We're all too familiar with the notion of some companies not even mentioning disability when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, or it's at the bottom of the list, or it's an afterthought. The current formulation of ESG strategies by companies presents a real opportunity to highlight and prioritize disability, equity, and inclusion. Just because an organization is diverse does not, of course, mean it's inclusive. Any company that hires a significant number of women, minorities, and people with disabilities can call itself diverse. An inclusive organization is one where its culture and core values truly value the different perspectives, ideas, and solutions that come from a diverse workforce and integrates those into the short and long-term strategy of the company. Business leaders need to ensure the buy-in within the organization of focusing on those with disabilities and ensuring adequate resources and skills are in place to achieve relevant targets and goals. Furthermore, an inclusive organization is one in which a diverse team is represented at every level, including the board of directors. The problem is the pool of talent at the senior level is not great, and we need to focus on changing this. And again, digital accessibility can play a key part. The concept of the workplace changed dramatically as a result of COVID-19. And that has had many consequences. I think the overused excuse that it's too hard or too expensive for places of work to be adapted to accommodate people with disabilities should no longer be valid. In many ways, what is valued in qualities of people in the workforce is altered significantly due to the massive and sudden dislocation of how workers interact with their place of work. Employees that are adaptive, flexible, self-starting, and able to effectively utilize technology to do their jobs can be the most productive and valued by employers. Each of those qualities is something that describes a person with disabilities already in the workplace. Also, research shows Again, thanks largely to the pandemic, companies are now recognizing broader wellness initiatives as a form of disability affirmation and inclusion, and are implementing programs to make the workplace healthier, more balanced, and accessible. Of course, investors are best positioned to work with companies to achieve greater disability inclusion across the private sector and ultimately across society. Investors have both the power driving ESG frameworks and the influence, knowledge, access, and track records of successful engagements with companies on a variety of other ESG issues that are needed to drive change. Disability inclusion could be the next frontier of ESG investing. However, for that frontier to be crossed, there must be better collaboration between investors, the private sector, and the disability community. ESG is not just about what happens internally within a company and its employees and formulating tactics, but it's how that organization interacts externally with clients, with customers, with suppliers, other stakeholders, and we need to measure that. As with all strategies and goals, we need wider and clearer metrics. It's time to move away from generic measurements such as numbers of people hired. That ignores inclusion. We need specifics around the performance of people in the whole organization and the environment within which it operates, and treating everyone equally. So we need metrics on the interaction between someone's capabilities, limitation in functioning, and environmental barriers, physical, social, cultural, or legislative, that might limit their participation in a workplace. We need metrics on numbers of employees voluntarily disclosing disabilities. Metrics on compensation, of course, is particularly important, but with a particular focus on equal pay for equal work. Executive level and board composition, again, part of the governance of ESG. Promotions, career advancement and retention. The number of external partnerships used to identify and recruit people with disabilities into an organization. Measurements around engagement with supply chain partners to integrate disability inclusion into those organizations and accurately measure the outcomes. An alignment between marketing and communications efforts and disability inclusion commitments. And there are others. It's these metrics that have to be built into ESG goals, objectives, and importantly, reporting on those goals. Remember, survey after survey shows the more diverse a company, the successful it will be. There's a long way to go on these issues for many organizations, but others are being very innovative. And as I say, I see this particularly with companies working in the developing world and engaging with a significant number of people, some with horrendous physical and mental disabilities, often emanating from crises, whether through conflict, natural disaster, or otherwise. We need to adopt the same innovation in the so-called developed world. I believe some of the companies I deal with are doing that, but others are most certainly not. It does help that those at the forefront of digital accessibility are actively promoting what they do, partly, as I mentioned earlier, post-COVID. We need to build on that and promote and publicize all of our achievements. Companies are increasingly investing in technology and implementing initiatives that actively advance disability inclusion, hence the importance of digital accessibility. Disability inclusion is not charity, it's not philanthropy or corporate social responsibility. Disability inclusion is a powerful tool to create lasting value in companies and perhaps more importantly, across society. So with that, I'm pleased to hand over to Steve Agnoli.
Thanks very much, David. I'm Steve Agnoli. I am the firm's Chief Information Officer, and I also function as the firm's Assistive Technology Liaison. It's a great pleasure to be with you all today, especially as we celebrate Leader's 10th anniversary. The firm has and continues to make a strong commitment to digital accessibility. We define digital accessibility as the availability of technology products and environments to help people with various disabilities to not be impeded or otherwise unable to use digital services, products, or functions. Digital accessibility means that application systems, websites, tools, and technologies are designed and developed so that people with disabilities can use them. More specifically, people can perceive, understand, navigate, interact with, and contribute through the use of technology. There are 4 principles of digital accessibility, and they're defined by what's called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And these are internationally recognized recommendations for making digital and web content more accessible. These recommendations have 4 accessibility principles, which are known by the acronym POUR, P-O-U-R. The P stands for perceivable. The information on a user interface and content are presented in a way so that nothing is undetectable or invisible to the user. O stands for operable. Users should be able to operate a digital tool with the controls they normally use, even if they're not used by most people. Understandable is the U. Digital tools should be understandable to every user and not overly complicated. And R is robust. Content must be equally robust across a wide variety of technologies and platforms, from one browser to the next, from PCs to handheld devices, etc. So digital technologies can remove barriers to communications and interaction that many people face in the physical world. However, when websites, applications, technologies, or tools are not properly designed, they can create barriers that exclude people from using technology well. At Reed Smith, we are striving to use these principles, the WCAG, to guide how we assess, develop, and deploy digital and web tools to assist our personnel, all of our personnel, with the effective use of technology and capabilities. So along with being the right thing to do, there's also a strong business case for digital accessibility. And I think David spoke to some of this as well. Digital inclusion is a business imperative. Organizations that seize upon the imperative have a brand, reputation, and bottom line advantage over their peers. They are also better to create lasting value for society than the companies that don't fully embrace disability inclusion. A study of Fortune 100 companies indicated that disability inclusion as part of an overall diversity strategy is a common practice among high-performing businesses. And when digital accessibility is part of strategic planning, businesses are better equipped to success in the connected world. Accessibility can enhance brand, drive business transformation, and improve a firm's position in the market. In other words, accessibility is a key component of an organization's DEI strategy that is also good for business. So on a transformational perspective, and again, looking at it with a digital lens, integrating accessibility removes architectural, digital, and social barriers that can get in the way of being a transformational business. Accessible design improves overall user experiences and satisfaction in a variety of situations and across different devices. Accessible design thinking provides varied and flexible ways for users to interact with websites and applications, options that are useful for people with and without disabilities. The results are interactions that are more human-centered, natural, and contextual. Developments like the typewriter, the telephone, punch cards, text-to-speech, email, and voice controls were initially meant to assist those with a disability, and all have found a much broader application. It's said that the accessibility problems of today, or the digital accessibility problems of today, are the mainstream breakthroughs of tomorrow. So keeping an eye from a transformational perspective on the digital side makes sense. A clear commitment to digital accessibility can demonstrate that a business has a genuine sense of corporate social responsibility, and that leads to an enhanced brand image and reputation, potentially increased sales, client loyalty, and improved workforce diversity, and many other benefits. Our goal over time is to shift thinking away from minimum compliance to instead focus on business opportunity and building better digital experiences for everyone, creating a more sustainable, customer-oriented approach to digital information and services. Certainly, the legal landscape is rapidly changing in favor of equal access, and we need to be responsive to that. Smart businesses, particularly those with global activities, are creating digital accessibility programs to mitigate risk and protect their reputations. And then from a market position standpoint, a Forrester Research economic impact study concluded that digital accessibility initiatives can contribute to cost savings when they're integrated into an existing and ongoing system development cycles. Technology updates and redesigns that include accessibility along with other best practices have been demonstrated to reduce cost for maintenance and services. Additionally, accessible software designs often lead to improvements in usability, user experience, and customer satisfaction. Accessibility can provide options that are useful to all customers in various situations. Companies who integrate and incorporate modern practices essential to disability inclusion, equality, and belonging are positioned to strengthen diversity, improve profitability, win the talent war, and achieve sustainable growth. At the end of the day, a digitally accessible technology environment has many benefits, including some of the tangible business benefits we just reviewed. Disability inclusion empowered by technology is a powerful tool to create lasting value in companies and in society at large. At Reed Smith, we are striving to maximize the benefits that digital accessibility can bring across all of our organization. So the firm's taken several steps to improve our digital accessibility capabilities and has plans to do more moving forward. Some of those actions to date include making assistive listening devices available in office conference rooms, assessing vendors' solutions digital accessibility capabilities as part of new and upgraded software tool deployments. This is an area of growth for many vendors, and it may be a while before all vendor software is highly accessible. But in the meantime, we're working to develop workarounds that leverage accessible features whenever possible, and continuing to stay in front of our vendors and saying that this is an increasingly important and very essential component that we look for in software systems that we use here at the firm. We're defining internal standards for web systems development that incorporate accessibility best practices. We're tagging and making pictures, tables, and other graphics screen reader friendly. We're pursuing compatibility within and across digital accessible tools, including incorporating new functionality of cloud-based tools to address accessibility needs. We're inventorying and reporting on our available accessible tools and systems, and you'll see that in our space very soon. We're adding accessibility language to messaging footers and notifications as appropriate. And maybe most importantly, we're receiving input from leaders, members, and the firm at large on areas to improve regarding our digital access capabilities and how we can guide our future actions in that regard. So we've created an assistive tech email D-list called Assistive Tech to collect digital accessibility questions, comments, and requests. I encourage you to use it to communicate your thoughts and facilitate conversation and actions in regards to accessibility topics. So in summary, we are driving our digital accessibility capabilities forward because it's the right thing to do as an organization and also as a business. The firm's IT department and I am happy to work with you all to bring more digitally accessible future into use here at Reed Smith. Thanks for the opportunity to be with you all here today. And with that, I'm pleased to turn over the program to Angie Matney.
Thanks, Steve, and thank you, David, as well. I'll be brief, though maybe that's difficult for an attorney to do, but I will endeavor to do my best. On a personal note, I want to say that it is very meaningful to me to be part of this particular summit. Last year, at around this time, I attended the summit for the first time. And at that point, I was on pins and needles waiting to hear, after many interviews and meeting with many wonderful people, whether or not I would receive an offer to join Reed Smith. Spoiler alert, it worked out. I did get that offer, obviously. So, and I remember thinking at the time that I hoped that maybe one day I could be a part of this summit. And honestly, leaders, the disability business inclusion group here at Reed Smith was one of the motivators for me to seek to join this firm. And it was exciting to think about being a part of the synergy that I could feel, as this is a disability confident organization. And so David and Steve have both talked about the business case for accessibility and the specific things that Reed Smith has done. And I will attest, I've noticed a difference in the nearly year that I've been here, that I'm definitely seeing more of those alt text descriptions and images and emails and things of that nature. So personal thank you. But just very briefly, I wanted to talk about some of the practical import of digital accessibility and what impact it can have, or the lack of it can have, on a person's ability to function in the workplace and outside of that. I will say there does seem to be an increasing awareness across the board that this matters. And perhaps one piece of evidence of that is that just last month, the U.S. Department of Justice announced that they have released a new version of their Americans with Disabilities Act website, ada.gov. And I mention that because the blog post that announced that release is almost a little crash course in digital accessibility. Take that together with Steve's earlier remarks and you'll get a good picture of what to do. The blog post makes the point that the website works with mobile devices, has easy to use tools, and is written in plain language. That plain language is also a good reminder of something that needs to be included for digital accessibility to help increase the understandability of many content. And we lawyers would be well advised to keep that plain language strategy in mind. The website includes overviews of featured topics that are high level with plain language explanations, and they're designed to be easy to scan and navigate. They have headings to help users skip to particular topics, and they provide clear examples. Now, all of that sounds great, and it sounds like things that would benefit everyone, not just people with disabilities, underscoring Steve's point that innovations originally intended to increase accessibility have benefited everyone over the years. And I think one interesting example of digital accessibility that drew some attention initially would be the alt text images for the Webb Space Telescope that NASA released. And so if you're interested in that, I suggest doing a little bit of searching and learning about those alt text images that made some of the images of space and the stars seem more comprehensible to those of us who don't have vision, and gave us that sense that we too could touch the stars in just a little bit of a way. So outside of all those lofty aspirations, though, what does digital accessibility mean practically? Well, we haven't always been in a state where digital accessibility awareness has been on the rise. I went to college in the mid-90s, dating myself, and at that time, when I needed to read a book for class, if I couldn't find a book on tape, and yes, I do mean cassette, I often had to get a print book and sit for several hours at a flatbed scanner, turning each page, scanning, and then ending up with a result that would be riddled with errors, but was sort of basically intelligible. About 10 years after undergrad, I went to law school, and it was a different world. Many books were available in digital formats, and so there was a whole lot less work that I had to do on the front end, and then I was able to participate in ways that were more similar to what my sighted colleagues were doing. And now, then, you know, as David mentioned as well, the pandemic brought to light many accessibility concerns. One of these was in education. For me, the practical implication of this was our public school system in the district where I lived at the time had a system that was not particularly accessible. They were able to help certain children with disabilities, but those parents, those of us who were parents with disabilities, were in a very difficult situation. My son was only in the 3rd grade at the time, and for him to be able to complete his assignments, he needed help from his mother, but his mother couldn't access the school's resources. So the end result of that was that during his 4th grade year, I decided to homeschool him because I could find an accessible platform that let me track his progress and assist him. So that was a fun year, homeschooling and working and doing all the things that we all did during the height of the pandemic. And I'm glad to say that the school district where we live now has systems that are much better. And in fact, even the school newsletters often have links to accessible resources. Within the workplace here at Reed Smith, I have to say it is the same. Much improvement has happened over the course of my 12 years as an attorney, and I'm seeing a lot of that here at Reed Smith. As I mentioned, I'm seeing more of those alt tags in the emails, but even beyond that, I know that I work at a disability confident organization, and what that means to me is when I have a problem, I can speak to Steve or someone else, and I know they will work with me to help me find a solution. We have many great panels ahead today, and I will, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the first panelists for you. And I just want to thank you all for attending our summit. And again, to say that I am really excited to be a part of it this year. So our first panel, we're going to look at the biggest challenges for DE&I over the past 10 years. We're going to reflect on societal progress over the last decade, challenges and developments. We're going to talk about the importance of creating a blueprint for DE&I and the role of affinity groups in shaping policy and practice. Our panelists are Stuart Pixley, Senior Attorney, Quantum and Silicon Systems Futures, Microsoft; Carol Mahegan, Responsible Business Manager, Reed Smith; and Charles Edward Catherine, Director of Corporate and Government Relations at the National Organization on Disability. Our moderators, Carolyn Pepper, Co-Chair of Leaders, and Richard Seeney, Partner at Reed Smith. And with that, I will turn it over to Carolyn and Richard. Thank you all so very much.
Thank you so much, Angie. So before we introduce the panel session, due to timing, we're not able to have colleagues with us from our offices in Asia, but we do have a small selection of videos that they have prepared for us for today's summit. The first follows in a moment. It's a video from Amy Yin, a partner in our Shanghai office, talking about a fun and innovative business idea created by disabled people in Shanghai, which has gone viral. It shows the benefits of diversity.
Look at this picture. It's a novelty coffee shop in Shanghai. It is serving beverages with a cuddly bear paw through a hole in the wall. After scanning a QR code on the wall, customers only need to wait a little while before a furry toy paw reaches out to deliver their desired drinks. Afterwards, the friendly paw sometimes exchanges a firm handshake with the lucky customers, or may even give them a gentle pat on the head. The shop is actually managed by 3 disabled individuals, including the deaf-mute manager who won the first prize in coffee brewing at the 6th National Professional Competition for the Disabled in China. Also known as the Bear Paw Cafe, this shop has gone viral among netizens after the first store was launched in downtown Shanghai on December the 3rd, 2020, which marked the International Day of People with Disabilities. So in the past, the job opportunities for disabled people are limited. Now, in addition to all the support and the promotion by the government as well as social organizations, we see that new business models and advanced technologies also help create more opportunities and also options to persons with disabilities. Most importantly, more and more people care about and would like to enhance the professional and the personal development of individuals with disabilities, just like the mission of our Leaders Program. So what were the misconceptions in the past which denied persons with disabilities access to opportunities?
So with that, I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists for this session. So we have Charles Edward Catherine, Charles joined the National Organization on Disability in 2018 as a special assistant to the president, going on to serve as NOD's Associate Director of Special Projects. With a background in global health, he served for several years as the Executive Director of the Surgeons of Hope Foundation. He successfully led the expansion of the organization from operating a solo program in Nicaragua to several ongoing congruent programs throughout Latin America. A 2012 graduate of Sciences Po Bordeaux in France, Charles holds a master's degree in international relations. He's also a classical pianist of 25 years, a marathoner, and an elite triathlete. Carol Mahegan is the responsible business manager in Reed Smith EMEA. She manages our EMEA office community outreach projects, focused on some of our vulnerable areas within the community, focusing on our DEI programs on students and young people across the age range of 5 to 18 years old and beyond, and also on our London office fundraising activities. She's a member of both Leaders and our Mental Health Task Force. And Stuart Pixley has been senior attorney at Microsoft for 14 years, where he currently supports the Azure Quantum and Azure Orbital business. Prior to joining Microsoft, he worked for over 10 years for large law firms in New York City and Silicon Valley, handling complex intellectual property and technology transactions for high-tech and life science clients. Stuart has also been deeply involved in disability diversity in the legal field. He's a current member and former co-chair of the Washington Attorneys with Disabilities Association. He's a former president and founding board member of the National Association of Attorneys with Disabilities, former commissioner of the ABA Commission on Disability Rights, and has served on the Committee for Diversity for the Washington State Bar Association, and has just finished his second 2-year term as co-chair of the Microsoft Legal Affairs Disability Diversity Team, which he inaugurated in 2012. Stuart is also a frequent panelist at legal diversity and inclusion events internationally. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So we're discussing in this panel the history and how we've reached the point that we're at. I'm going to kick off this discussion with a question about data. So how was data about disability collected and measured 10 years ago? And how has that changed over time? Stuart, would you mind please turning your hand to this first?
Sure, absolutely. And thanks a bunch for having me on. Just a quick caveat, I'm providing this information sort of as an active observer and participant in the D&I world, and I've seen a lot, but I'm not an employment attorney or disability rights attorney. I keep the world safe for quantum computers and orbital communications. But what I've seen is that historically, U.S. companies have been allowed to track race and gender because they're required to do so. This is particularly in the U.S. They translate all of this into deep metrics around representation overall, representation of various levels, promotion velocity, leadership representation, all 9 yards. This is poured over by HR, by D&I leaders, by affinity groups, and it's really the basis for so much discussion around benchmarking and planning and et cetera, and you know, and it's not surprising in this day and age of data obsession. But you know, it sort of led our leadership, D&I leadership, to proclaim, and it makes sense. Nothing really changes unless you measure it, because you don't know if you're ever going to make progress. This has historically not been the case for disability and LGBT and a few other areas, and in large part because there was no requirement for that information to be collected in the first place. And without those requirements, there's a lot of fear about requesting this information, even voluntarily. They're concerned that it would be construed as pressure, that they would be, concerned about potential retaliation for disclosure, and basically from that, a lot of privacy issues. And as those of you who are privacy experts know, it's not just whether or not you are explicitly identified and can be discovered is having a disability or any other facet of your information. It's whether or not that status and thus your disability can be deduced implicitly from the information that's disclosed and from the sample size. So there's a lot of hesitance over many, many years to do anything. And so we've just not even been part of the conversation. So this has changed somewhat in the US around, say, 2014 due to changes in the US federal rules for contractors, that so-called Section 503 of the Rehabilitation Act. And this has changed things slowly and incrementally. And it largely allows for some collection and retention of information for the purpose of satisfying your, the affirmative action requirements of that regulation. So, but it's only now that we're starting to see companies collect and disclose that information, even at the highest level. And that's a start, and it's an important start. And Microsoft is among many others that sort of do this. And to get there, we had to do a lot of encouragement around self-disclosure, talking about the benefits, reducing the stigma, appealing to allyship, all the things that you should do to create the right kind of psychological safety to make this happen. And this is a start, but I want to tell you guys that this is a drop in the bucket. To achieve anything like parity with other diverse groups, we've got to figure out how to do a lot more. I want personally for employers and affinity groups to have the same level and richness of detail for disability as we do for race and gender, and then we'll have the same kind of tools to drive inclusion and promotion and opportunity, the same as with anyone else.
So, Charles, I mean, within the NOD, I mean, data is key, right? What's your perspective on this?
Absolutely. One of the things we're known for at the National Organization on Disability is data through our employment tracker. It's a survey that companies take, and actually Reed Smith has been taking it every year for the past few years to benchmark their performance. And, it's really interesting to see that through this survey, and again, that's a self-selecting group because it's companies who volunteer to do this, right? So it's already companies that are forward-thinking on the topic. But about 72% of tracker takers measure self-ID rates for people with disabilities, which actually almost exactly overlaps with the ratio of companies that are federal contractors in the US. And in other words, what I'm seeing here is that, as Stuart was explaining earlier, things are moving forward through compliance, unfortunately. And it still is an uphill battle to get those things to change. And it's also interesting to note through our survey that companies that go beyond just tracking self-ID, that track other talent outcome metrics, have higher self-ID rates. And it makes sense, right? Because as Stuart said, once you have that data, you are able to better address the needs of your population. And just to give you an idea, companies that only track self-ID have a self-ID rate of about 1.4%. And companies that track additional outcomes have a self-ID rate of about 4.3%. Now, we know that on average, there is about 20% roughly of the population that has a disability, right? So 4.3% is not great, but it's still much, much better, right? And than 1%. And, we have our work cut out for us. And it's been taking a lot of time. And as someone with a disability myself, I'm blind, it's been frustrating, honestly, to see that this is still mostly a conversation geared around compliance. Now, on top of that, we know that there is an employment gap, right? People with disabilities are about twice more likely to be unemployed. And, when they are employed, they're paid less, right? About 37% less. It's a huge wage gap. And even if you control by education and by experience, it's still a 12% gap. And then on top of that, often people with disabilities have higher costs of living, right? So it makes it a very difficult situation, which is why most of us are in poverty, unfortunately. And so, yeah, we're making progress, we're measuring more, and we know that measuring more leads to better outcome, but still a lot of work to do.
Thank you very much, Charles. And I would like at this point just to say that, just to commend the NOD survey to you all. As Charles says, we've been doing it for quite a long time, and it's a great way of working out what you're doing right and what you could be doing better, because there are always questions there which challenge you and help you to understand what you're missing and what you could be improving on. So within that discussion, we were talking about data and disability and diversity generally, but has disability always been treated as a facet of diversity to date, do you think? Charles, do you want to step in on that one?
Absolutely. I think, it's been often the last disability segment to be considered. And we've seen the gap, as I mentioned in the data. And disability is about all of us, right? We can all acquire a disability at any time. And most people with disabilities acquired that disability at some point in life. I am in the minority. I was born with a disability, but that's only 17% of people with disability that were born with a disability. And, it's really interesting to note that without a real role model and without those positive stories out there, it's very difficult. I really liked hearing Angie's story in college, and my experience was very similar when I was in college, and I didn't know of many blind students around me who were doing well, and so I was really struggling, and I was also cutting those books and scanning them one by one, page by page, and so by highlighting success stories of employees with disabilities, I really wish I could have spoken to Angie, many years ago. And by also having senior leaders who disclose their disability, you can just change your culture and have better outcome and help people feel more comfortable disclosing their disability. And just one data point from the survey, companies that have senior leaders who self-identify have self-ID rates that are twice higher than the average. And, many companies come to us and say, Charles, what are some of the best practices that really you see have an impact? And the number one best practice is having senior leaders who self-disclose and are involved in this work.
Thank you, Charles. That's really interesting and something we must all give some more thought to. Stuart, how do you see disability as overall in the context of diversity and how it's been treated to date?
Yeah, so it's important to sort of look at this sort of as a evolution, and it originally and for many years. Disability has not been part of diversity. It's sort of been treated on its own as its own thing. And I would say initially, before the Americans with Disabilities Act and similar legislation, disability was largely addressed on sort of a charity basis, on sort of a dignity basis, give people jobs because they need, respect their self-dignity. And so a lot of the programs and language around it reflected that. And it was about tax credits and maybe some support, et cetera. And certainly the government wanted less people on their rolls. But, it was sort of that charity and, provide these poor people with their dignity. Since the advent of the ADA, which has a strong civil rights framework, the measurement has actually rather been whether or not you've been provided an accommodation, and accommodation has been a measurement of inclusion. And this has been sort of the mindset for a while, especially amongst the broader group of folks not in the disability community. So when in around 2012, the Washington State Bar Association asked our Washington Attorneys Group for feedback on their proposed study. It was striking to us that, and the study was on other marginalized groups and membership. The questions specific to disability were, do you have a disability as defined by the ADA? A lot of people don't know exactly what that definition is. Have you ever requested an accommodation? And was that accommodation granted? And that was the sum total. And what this misses is that accommodation is just one, I mean, although it's a very important one, part of what it means to be inclusive. And the insight is that every question you ask of other marginalized groups is equally applicable to folks with disabilities. Are you represented? Do you have mentors? Do you have access to opportunities? Are you supported? Are you allowed to be your true self? Now, why is this so? Why is it the same question? Because, you know, we have not just been marginalized by our built environment. Notice I didn't say by our disabilities. We've also been, marginalized by prejudice, stereotypes, stigma, fear, all the things that so many other marginalized groups experience. But the flip side is equally true, right? We add equal value to diversity and to our organization as other marginalized groups. You aren't doing us a favor by empowering us. You're helping your organization become more vibrant and valid, and you're unblocking your potential as much as ours. So, I think this is the arc. This is the arc of sort of seeing disability as being part of, the same as, every other group. And I would sort of end by saying, right now, there's a great, fantastic focus on intersectionality with, BIPOC group, with LGBT, et cetera. And it's sort of looking across many different cultures and genders and identities, we can experience and appreciate how our struggles are so much the same as everyone else's. So that's the way I sort of see the arc.
Thank you, Stuart. I think some really important messages there to think about and just to bring to the forefront people with disabilities and put them at the forefront of your diversity efforts. Carol, I know you've got some stories to tell us, a particular viewpoints on this, on disability within the sort of broader diversity spectrum.
Yeah, thanks, Carolyn. First of all, thank you so much for having me on this panel. I feel very privileged to be part of this discussion with Stuart and Charles. So talking about diversity in general, I think really if we go back even further than sort of 15, 20 years, I remember when I started in the legal industry, it was probably about 30 plus years ago, diversity, and if we include equity and inclusion as well, was never heard of. Nobody spoke about that. Nobody spoke about anything being diverse, people being diverse or anything, because everyone pretty much looked the same. I mean, when I started in my very first law firm, which was a kind of medium size at that point, there was nobody who looked like me. I mean, I probably fitted under many different, what we now call protected characteristics, under many different demographics. But the biggest thing that stood out was that I didn't see anyone like me. So that challenge to just be myself was probably doubled because how do I be myself and but still be part of the, what everybody else looks like. So I think that it's great now to see the progression. I mean, since I've been at Reed Smith for almost 15 years, that progression I've seen has been so encouraging, and I'm seeing it through other law firms as well. And that continues at great speed, which is great, so that hopefully this sort of topic and discussion shouldn't be something that we have to have on a regular basis. It should just be a natural thing. Everybody is accepted for whatever their diverse background may be or who they are. But I think when we look at the disability side of that, it definitely didn't fall within the diverse area of the discussion, because I think people still found disability as being a taboo subject, something that you can't talk about, something that should be hidden, because it wasn't understood. And especially if it was invisible, if it was a neurodiversity or mental health type of disability. Nobody talked about that. And a lot of people probably who even fell within that spectrum of disability didn't even know they had a disability. They just thought it was just part of who they were. So I think when we're talking about the disability area of diversity, it's still an unknown quantity. And I think a lot of children, a lot of adults are still finding they're sidelined because of it, because people don't fully understand what it's all about. So the education piece on disability is still needing to be continued.
Absolutely. Thank you, Karen, and I completely agree. So another thing we've seen over the last 10 years is the establishment of affinity groups, right? How many employers have affinity groups? What impact do they have? Are they meaningful? Why do they matter? Charles, I don't know if you're happy to kick us off on this one.
Happy to. And for this, we have data as well. At least among the companies that took our survey, 95% of companies have affinity groups. And obviously, that's not a surprise. It's a best practice that now almost all companies are adopting. But of those, only 81% had an affinity group for people with disabilities. And it's a good number, but it's still way behind, right? And again, that sort of illustrates everything that Stuart shared earlier about the lag, right, for our community. And, you know, of course, affinity groups, and I think we've seen a brilliant example of this today, are key to really change the culture but also help with business success. Especially through COVID, you know, it was very important for all of us to have a community and people who are facing similar challenges and creating this sense of belonging. And we also know that for the company, having a higher self-ID rate, for instance, is a very important thing now. But getting there is mostly about helping your employees feeling comfortable to disclose. You know, we've seen that most disabilities are hidden, and most people age into disability. So among your workforce, you will have people who will acquire those disabilities, right? It's not just about hiring. And by having a very dynamic affinity group, you're going to become an employer of choice. And I think Angie shared that brilliantly. But you're also going to help your existing workforce have a good level of awareness and what it means, and what are, first of all, understanding the definition also of disability. You know, it's a very broad group and sometimes a difficult conversation to have. And so creating that comfort zone and that vulnerability for all of us.
Thank you, Charles. Stuart, what's your view? Are affinity groups useful?
Yeah, no, I think that affinity groups are super important because I believe for the disability community is really foundational. And you know, frankly, I just want to double down on absolutely everything that you know, Charles just said. And you know, my own perspective is, of course, this affinity group for folks with disabilities are like every other, in the sense that is where we network, it's where we compare notes, where we develop best practices, make plans, set priorities. We start to practice, you know, our organizing and leadership skills, which, you know, oftentimes I think people with disabilities don't have the opportunity to do otherwise. But, you know, I think what's so important, and what Charles mentioned, is that this is where, for many of us, we experience in the workforce a place of understanding, acceptance, and really true belonging. And it's one of the most prevalent experiences for folks with disabilities to have isolation and to be disconnected. So one of the most powerful and one of the most affirming is to develop community. And I think it's community where we finally find the support and the reserves to go beyond, you know, merely surviving to actually thriving. The other thing that's significant about community for people with disabilities is it's about identity. And this is really a radical concept for people with disabilities who've internalized negative stereotypes and stigma. But I think it's only when we start to see ourselves as a group, as a collective of people with a common experience and culture, do we realize that we have common cause with one another. And from that, I think true power. If really 1 in 5 people in the world have a disability, we should be one of the most powerful constituencies on the planet. And we've not done so to date because I think we don't claim identity and we don't embrace community. And we can change that in our little corner of the world through affinity groups. And, you know, also to echo what Charles said, affinity groups, like other sort of institutional communities, gives us a good way to credibly interact with leadership of our organizations and to give voice to our membership. Even our existence is an important statement. But from that, we can press for the changes that we need, raise awareness, and model all the sorts of values and attitudes that we aspire for the larger organization. So for all of those reasons, affinity groups are just absolutely essential.
Thank you. Do you think there's an element for disability of, I mean, I'm disabled, I'm autistic, you're disabled. Our disabilities are different, and we wouldn't necessarily, without affinity groups, think of being supportive of each other. I guess we would, but is there an element of that too that makes disability special or important for affinity groups?
Sorry, is that to me, Richard?
Well, I was asking Stuart, but I mean,
okay.
No, yeah, good question. So I agree with you, right? Disability is hugely diverse. We have so many different conditions. And by the way, thank you, Charles, for saying that you had a vision impairment. You know, I have cerebral palsy. I use an electric wheelchair. I have, you know, used hearing aids. I'm multiply disabled. But you're exactly right. Exactly right, which is we are so diverse that we often don't talk to each other. We often don't see what we have in common. And there's a great, you know, tendency for groups to become highly segmented. Creating a broad affinity group, and I've always been a fan of sort of cross disability work, is like super important because we understand what we really have, what we really have in common. And, you know, double down also on what Carol said about sort of the, you know, heretofore invisibility of folk with invisible disabilities and mental illness issues and so forth. But the most powerful thing is not just that we get to see that, but that your best advocates and your best allies are other folk with disabilities, even if those aren't the same ones. And that's a powerful exercise that we need to do for ourselves to grow our community and to model for what the larger D&I community should be doing.
Thank you, and apologies if I committed a faux pas. Obviously, we've seen you in these events before and know you well. So Carol, as a complete spoiler, when I introduced it at the beginning, I talked about your involvement in Reed Smith's affinity groups. Would you mind talking a bit about your experience and how it's affected you?
Yeah, absolutely, Richard, thank you. So I would, again, echo in both what Charles and Stuart have said about affinity groups being essential. I would definitely say they are a necessity for any firm. It shows the firm is supporting the people of their employees. And I've seen at Reed Smith how important our affinity groups have been to our employees and how they feel supported. They have a community, they feel like they have a voice, and it allows them to come together to share what they have and to feel that they're not alone in their own journey, in their career journey with their disability. And I'm very proud to be part of the Leaders Affinity Group and the Mental Health Task Force. And I've got to give some kudos to Carolyn Pepper, who started Leaders back in 2012 on the basis of the Paralympics started and in 2012, and we saw some incredible people with various disabilities do some amazing things and reach some very high goals. And it made us decide to look into ourselves and see, you know, people that we have who are amazing in what they do. Do they need extra support? Do they have disabilities of some sort that no one is really recognising or helping them to recognise? And so with Leaders being born and the community of leaders growing, I mean, we have, I think, over 200 members now across the globe, which is tremendous. It being our first business, our first affinity group, enabled the other affinity groups to then sort of evolve from that one idea, because we realised that there are many different demographics that we should be looking at. But also, before the pandemic and even when the pandemic started, the mental health task force was just a subgroup of leaders. But then with the pandemic hit and so many people realised that they had mental health issues or illnesses, even for the first time, or it was exacerbated by what was going on in the world, or they were already coping with long-term illnesses. It was a way of, again, finding an affinity group for those people to feel that they had that extra support. They could talk to people like themselves, but they could also have people who were allies to support them through their own journey. And so I think, you know, having affinity groups is an essential part for a firm to make sure that they're looking after their employees. And however you sort of bring them together, I think it's just a case of encouraging people to be part of those groups, whether they fit under that community or whether they're just an ally, or like I like to call them, upstanders.
Thanks very much, Carol. That's great. And it's a pleasure to have you as part of our affinity group. So thank you. So I'm mindful that we're running out of time for this panel. We could probably talk for hours, sadly. But so I'm just going to ask you briefly, Carol, can you just describe for me what the development has been of disability from a superficial, perhaps, understanding of physical disabilities onto the more into invisible disabilities like neurodivergence, mental health, and then perhaps at the end of that, perhaps Charles and Stuart could just talk briefly about the challenges that we've yet to resolve. And we've seen amazing progress, I think, over the last 10 years, but we'd just like to hear from you. What do you think of the new things that we'd have to resolve? So Carol, if you could just answer that question first. Carol, I think we've lost your volume there for a minute.
So sorry. I've got to take myself off of mute. I knew that would happen. I think, you know, using my own experience of, you know, having an invisible disability, I have mental health illnesses. I've got bipolar depression, complex PTSD, severe anxiety and OCD, and having those and knowing that there is a mental health task force that can help me go through the necessity of my management of how I deal with mental health situation is incredible. I mean, when I first got diagnosed back in 2020, I really didn't know in what direction to turn to. I got the help I needed from an amazing psychiatrist. I also spent some time in the psychiatric unit as well, and then being taught how to manage my conditions, being put on the right medication, but also knowing that the firm was 150% behind me and was, you know, still saw me as a valued employee was amazing. Because if you have something for the first time, or even if you have something that's a long-term condition, and then you have, you know, an episode, a flare-up, whatever it may be, you do actually second-guess yourself as to how viable are you as a person within the firm that you're working with. And I think if you know that the firm is there to help you to continue your growth, to help you to manage whatever your difficulties you're going through, it's an incredible feeling to know that you are always going to be there and supported, and you feel like you can just carry on as who you are and be who you are, even with your conditions. And I think it's helping, the big challenge is the more we're talking about it, the more we're breaking down those barriers, the more people from within our firm are feeling comfortable enough to come forward and talk about their conditions. And lots of people have, from senior right down to junior, you know, across the globe. I feel we're very lucky as a firm that we have so many people who are willing to share their stories, and those stories are hopefully helping other people. That's, I think, making it a more credible type of disability be more credible for people to understand it, even if they can't see it. And I think that's the biggest message that we really need to get across, is that you don't have to see something to understand it. If you want to know more about it, ask the questions. And I think we do a lot of training, we do a lot of talks, we do these types of events, and the more we do this, the more disabilities will become acceptable.
Thank you, Carol, and thank you very much for the impact that you have on people by speaking about your story and by being authentic. I think you shouldn't underestimate that. So thank you for that. So Charles and Stuart, if you could just very briefly, just to finish off this panel, just mention what challenges you think are the most important ones we've yet to resolve. Charles, if you want.
Sure, happy to. And for me, the most important is to really think about the way we value people with disabilities. And one quick example of that is when I immigrated to the US, I'm French originally, about 10 years ago, I found out about Section 14C of the Fair Labor Standards Act. Now, it sounds a little technical, but what it is really is something that allows companies to pay people with disabilities sub-minimum wage. And, English is my second language. When I first heard the word sub-minimum wage, I was like, I'm a little confused. I thought minimum wage was a thing. So what's under minimum wage, right? And sometimes, and actually often, people with disabilities who are hired under 14C are paid pennies per hour to do a job. And originally it was meant as a progressive piece of legislation that helped companies sort of take a chance on people with disabilities and then realize that they were productive and successful. Big surprise. But it's not how it has evolved. And now hundreds of thousands of people with disabilities in the US are paid less than minimum wage. And now I use that as an example because it shows that we are still using a very old matrix in terms of the way we think about disability and disability inclusion. And hopefully conversations like today's will help move things forward. So thank you so much again for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Elsa. We're very grateful for having you here. Thank you very much for your contributions. Stuart, do you want to just finish us off?
Yeah, so on the subject of challenges, and I would sort of think about this as like, what do we want to do next? I think there's like 4 things that I really think about. One, you already talked about it, the numbers game. We need to figure this out in order to level the playing field. And I want to see a world in which we can hold people accountable for our representation. And I want to see leaders in senior leadership positions to look a little bit more like me and everyone on the panel. I want to see also more targeted projects. I think that we are coming into an area where we're past just tacking on disability to the end of our D&I statements. And I think to really move the needle in this legal field and other places, we need to have more modern programs to recruit folks with disabilities. I'm super glad to hear that Reed Smith has ambitions in this area. And spoiler alert, Microsoft is looking at taking its highly successful disability inclusive hiring process for targeting folks with disabilities and experimenting with how we can apply that in the legal field as well. I want to see us focus not just on getting in the door, but I want to see us focus on how to make people thrive once they're inside. Go see point number 1 on metrics. We need to set that bar high. And personally, I think as a community, we're going to have to find our bright stars and figure out how to cultivate them into the positions that we want. Finally, I want to see more normalization. This is great. I am so happy that the Reed Smith is doing what they're doing. The question is, why aren't there enough other firms doing exactly the same thing? We need to do that. We need to make sure that disability is a prominent feature of all major D&I events, et cetera. More articles and spotlights, and most of all, we need a bigger, more connected, and more powerful community. And thanks to you folks for helping to make that happen.
Thank you so much, Stuart, and thank you for sharing your wisdom with us, and thank you, Carol, too. I think that was a really good look back at some of the things that have happened over the last 10 years. And I'm looking forward to the next panel shortly, which is going to talk about where we are now, followed by a panel of people who are going to talk about the future. So we're just going to play now a video of one of our fantastic pro bono clients, Face Equality, who are going to talk a bit about their work and share some insights there.
My name is Phillida Smith, and I am the CEO of Face Equality International. I have shoulder-length brown hair, olive skin, glasses, and a facial scar, and I'm wearing a black top. Here at Face Equality International, together with our 37 member charities, we campaign to end the discrimination and indignity experienced by people with facial disfigurements around the world. We do this through advocacy, empowerment, and education. And in campaigning for an equitable society for people with facial disfigurements, we must ensure that EDI policies and practice, along with legal protection, adequately extends to people with any kind of appearance affecting condition, given that this is a community that all too often gets neglected in the fight for disability rights and human rights too.
Hi, my name is Rena Rosen, and my pronouns are she, her, and I was born with a craniofacial condition. I'm a white woman with brown hair and glasses. It is a human survival need to belong. Part of that belonging is knowing that someone has your back, that you can be authentically you and be accepted and valued for that. It's so important that we continue to fight for laws in place to protect individuals with facial differences from discrimination at school, at work, and in community. On behalf of every child whom are just beginning their journey, I am personally grateful for all your hard work so that they and we will be in a better, equitable place, literally all over the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we'll be hearing a bit more from Face Equality later on one of our other panels. So actually our next panel. So I'm just going to hand over now to Angie and Jonathan, who are going to moderate our next panel, which is about the people experience, the importance of storytelling. And these are insights from people who've been involved with and benefited from the progression of DE&I think, over the last 10 years. We're going to talk about the personal impact of affinity groups, the importance of ESG, digital accessibility, etiquette, awareness training and education, as well as working together for change with stakeholders, looking towards the future. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Jonathan and Angie.
Thanks, Carolyn. We appreciate it. And let's see, I think this microphone works better if I, point it somewhere near my face. Okay. Thanks so much. We're looking forward to this panel. And Jonathan, if you are with us, would you like to introduce the panelists?
Yeah, I've got this one. It's doing on and flashing on and off. Yeah, that's better. Yeah, thank you. So thank you, Andrew. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and thank you, Carolyn, for the very kind introduction and fantastic panel. So as Carolyn mentioned, we are going to be talking about the people experience. And so we have 3 panelists. They have Vaibhav Adlakar, who is an associate at Reed Smith. We have Danielle Liebel, who's an associate at corporate accounts at Amazon Web Services, and Phillida Swift, CEO of Face Equality International. I'll just let the panelists introduce themselves in their own words briefly. So Vaibhav, would you like to go first?
Sure. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And it feels weird sharing my story, because I think I'm here because Reed Smith saw something in me that I didn't see in myself at the time. So I think I'm a competition lawyer in my day job, but the importance of affinity groups, in which we're going to come on to, is the reason people like me found a voice and understood the importance of the responsibility that we had as individuals to make the change we wanted to see in the world. So happy to be on this panel and discuss ways to move forward.
And thank you very much, Bev. I know me and you came into Reed Smith similar times. I think I was about a year after you, but have a sort of similar experience of that and the work of the firm to show people's energies and look to see what they can do and support that. Danielle, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I am Danielle Liebel. I'm Associate Corporate Counsel at Amazon Web Services. I support our sales and marketing team, in particularly in our partner organization. But I also do a lot of advocacy for people with disabilities, both within Amazon Legal and outside. On the board of directors of Special Olympics Washington and Generation Spirit. And before Amazon Web Services, I had the pleasure of being an associate alongside Vaibhav and Jonathan at Reed Smith. So it's great to be back at Leaders event.
Thank you, Danielle. And I can assure you that the pleasure was all Reed Smith's.
Yeah.
And Phillida, did you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everybody. So you've hopefully seen that short video from Face Equality International just now, but we are a membership of other charities and we campaign to end the discrimination and indignity experienced by people with disfigurements or facial differences around the world. We've gotten to know Reed Smith really well over the past 2 years because they conducted some incredible pioneering research which exposed the gaps in current disability laws around the world and in how those laws extend to people with appearance affecting conditions, or more importantly, don't always extend. So this is a really, really interesting panel for us, and it's great for us to be representing the facial difference community because it so often is a community that gets sidelined in the conversation around disability policy. And it's interesting that this is a session about storytelling as well, because storytelling is very much how I got into this space. I shared my story with a charity that's now one of our members called Changing Faces, and that was my story about sustaining facial scars. And that led me through the kind of journey of taking on a role and volunteering and then kind of progressing. So storytelling is something that's incredibly pertinent to me, both personally and professionally. So thank you so much for having me.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much for being here. And you're quite right about storytelling. I think the narratives and the ability to allow everybody to tell their own story and support people to do that is really key to any form of inclusion, in fact, particularly for disability. Also, I just wanted to introduce myself as one of the moderators. I'm Jonathan. I am an associate at Reed Smith. I work in entertainment and media team alongside many of the wonderful people here. I work with Carolyn, and I'm an associate alongside Vaibhav, and also at the same time with Danielle. And a big champion and supporter of disability inclusion, very much a big believer in the importance not only of actually people coming into the profession, but also moving through it. So this idea of the different panels on different levels of the profession and the future, for example, and the present is something I very much agree with, and making sustainable. Angie, I don't know if you wanted to just maybe say a few words before we kind of kick off.
Thank you. Yeah, so I am very excited to be on this panel, and some of you may have heard me speak a little bit earlier, but I will take an opportunity to say shout out to entertainment and media. I'm also in the entertainment and media group. I'm a privacy attorney for the most part, and I do some counseling related to digital accessibility as well, and also work with companies on understanding the nexus between those two areas, which is, a really big one actually. And as I mentioned, I'm a relatively recent lateral. I started in January with Reed Smith, and leaders was one of the reasons that I wanted to come to Reed Smith. And so thanks to the work of people like Jonathan and Vaibhav and Danielle and everybody else, and Carolyn and Richard, I was just so excited to join an organization like Reed Smith that had a group like leaders. And I think that kind of leads us naturally into one of the first questions that we wanted to talk about, and to just kind of address and maybe ask the panelists to kind of speak to this, and maybe we can I'm not sure who would like to begin the discussion, but the issue is to kind of talk about the impact that DE&I groups have had on you over the course of your career. How do you think that has evolved over the course of your career? So yeah, who'd like to kind of begin with that discussion?
I'm happy to start.
Thanks, Bob.
I think that when I joined Reed Smith, I'm one of the people who didn't know what DE&I work they did. I was one of the people who just said, give me a firm, I want to finish my training contract, and the rest, I actually don't know what's going to happen. So, but when I came into Reed Smith and, found, I think leaders found me more than I found them. You understand how you get a voice, the importance of the responsibility that you have. I don't think this event would even happen without the support of leaders and of the people who are in the organization, because they allow you to give a platform. They not only change policy, I'm sure affinity groups in any firm will feel a sense of responsibility to not only make the place better for the firm they're in changing policy, but also the profession at large. Firms like Reed Smith and others have a stature in the legal profession. They have a voice that needs to be heard, and I think they are the ones that can help facilitate change. So the fact that for me personally, from a point of view where I didn't think about D&I groups and that their existence mattered, and now when I think about it, it's a sense of you're more than just a lawyer. You're more than what you do in your day job. You have a voice that can have a lasting legacy beyond your own professional success.
Yeah, absolutely. If anyone else had any thoughts on that question as well, because obviously I think affinity groups are a very important aspect, and I've certainly benefited very much, I think, from having leaders to show you that it was an inclusive environment, that the firm cared about these matters, and that the effort's gone into it. I don't know if any other panelists had any thoughts on that. Danielle.
You think after 2 years you get used to unmuting yourself? You don't. At least I don't. Yeah, I kind of take, credit my career trajectory to D&I groups. When I was in law school, I applied to the Microsoft Legal Intern Program, which was more so an accessibility program for students with a disability back then. And I got to be very active in the Microsoft DE&I group when I was an intern. And because of the connections I made there and the visibility that they gave me, they helped me connect me to Reed Smith and said, you should go here because they have an outstanding DE&I effort for people with disabilities. So I don't think I would be where I am without DE&I and the connections that you make. And like Vaibhav said, leaders, when I was at Reed Smith, was great at giving me visibility And as a young attorney, we all know that work matters. You know, you need that work to increase your visibility, and leaders gave kind of that network where we could kind of coach each other up in our careers, which I think is amazing.
Yeah, I think that's really, really true, and giving the opportunities to people and those chances to be seen, and the opportunities that others may find, but making them more accessible is a really important part of how D&I groups should work. And I think actually on that point, I wonder about how maybe we can think about how those affinity groups can actually collaborate in order to increase impact, and maybe bringing that more to the forefront of the decision makers and leaders' minds, and ensure that D&I affinity groups are able to influence team culture and have that better understanding of differing requirements different people may have, depending on what identities they may have. So on that topic of collaboration and maximising impact, I don't know if anyone had any thoughts on the panel. Barbara, did you? I feel like you might want to say something.
No, let Felida go first.
Of course, Felida.
So I guess, in the spirit of collaboration, I think what would be brilliant is to embrace more. I think the themes that have come up already on this event is intersectionality, and I guess the shared priorities for all equity-seeking groups in terms of influencing policy, but also just creating that ingrained culture throughout the entire business, I think, which celebrates multifaceted, multi-talented human beings and all that they are. So I think absolutely the spirit of collaboration goes beyond disability, and there is great strength to be found in, I guess, the parallels that of both the disability community and other potentially marginalized groups within a business and beyond. And that goes in terms of, I think, particularly from our perspective.
Oh, I think you've gone on mute, Felida.
Yeah, I just got muted. I just got silenced.
We don't want to silence anyone.
No, that's exactly what we're talking about here, is not being silent. Where was I? I think collaboration beyond businesses as well, and going into the third sector. What was really interesting earlier was talking about the history of DEI and how it used to be a charity thing and now it's a business thing. And I think bringing those two worlds together and having the access to the kind of the diverse community is really important as well.
Hi, London office. Can you please unmute there?
Is it okay?
That's
cool.
I
So
think we can hear you now. Yeah.
So the one thing I would add, which I didn't add when we previously said, it's a collaboration journey. Whether it's someone with a disability, whether it's someone with an LGBT group or any of that sort, it's a collaboration journey. We need someone to collaborate with us in that way. And the other thing I would say is, it's not about working in silos that, okay, I'm only going to, the leader group is only going to focus on disability, and we're only going to focus on, for example, bringing those people up, or the PRISM group that we have only focuses on people with LGBT, and the mentoring schemes are only open to those guys, or those kind of things. You, as Felida said, you have a common. It's important that we don't work on silos, because then your voice is not to say it's not important. In every individual's voice is important, and if you shout loud enough, like I do, you can probably rattle the glass a bit. But I think if we work together, in terms of what our common themes are and what we want to commonly achieve, it benefits everybody, and I think that's a very important thing. The fist. I think we can punch the wall harder if we make a fist and collaborate rather than me banging with my one hand. So I guess that's what I wanted to go into and why it's so important.
From personal experience, also, just demonstrating that as a team is a very powerful thing. Demonstrating that to your clients and your partners. So just as an example, my boss and my boss's boss, and actually my whole team, we're all diverse. And my boss and my boss's boss are diverse women in the legal profession. And so it's really powerful, I've seen when we get pushback because of whatever our diversity is, to be united and be like, we're your lawyer, this is what you get, you want to escalate, fine. But it's almost a teaching through example when you unite through diversity. I found that to be super powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really do think it just goes to show what we can do when we kind of work together and pool our resources. I know we have some points here about, one of the things we discussed was about accessibility actually and about etiquette. And Angie, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to ask on that one.
Yeah, in as much as one of the things that we have talked about was digital accessibility. I know how, as a blind person, that impacts me, but I'm just wondering if any of you can speak to how technological changes have improved your work and what workplaces can do to make those things kind of to help digital accessibility be more available to people with different types of disabilities and different types of working needs. And so let's see, maybe we can, well, let's start with Vaibhav. Would you like to speak to that? And then we can ask a couple of the other panelists if they have any thoughts on that.
What do you mean about how has digital accessibility impacted things? I think it's like anything development, almost like if we weren't able to fly into space before rockets came in. So it's something that makes the profession more attainable. Digital accessibility, ESG, all these developments have made your career attainable. I can dream to be a lawyer now, better than what I could do 10 years ago, because I know I'm aware of this now, more aware of the supports that's available. It's changed people's thinking of, we're not somebody who we have to think about how cost effective are we going to be? Can we be put in front of the clients and everything like that? Digital accessibility and ESG has made that more attainable, made the profession more attainable rather than something that's beyond us. So I think that's my take on all technological developments, because it's changed the mindset and it's dispelled some of the misconceptions that the first Asia video talked about, that the profession is something that's attainable to people like us, because people are now understanding that it's possible to work differently and think differently as a result.
I think that's a really good point. It's many barriers, are becoming less of an issue because of that. So, and that I though, just in the interest of time, there's another topic that I think is important to talk about too. and that's recruitment. And, you know, many of us on this panel have gone through many recruitment processes and interviews at different places, and probably have our fair share of war stories to tell. But you know, for our panelists, anyone who'd like to talk about this, what should businesses do to help make sure recruitment is fair and diverse? And what special considerations apply in the recruiting context to emerging technologies like the use of AI and machine learning? I thought that might kind of be an interesting topic for us to get into a little bit.
Shall I fire away? Because I think this is something that's particularly pertinent to us at Face Equality International, particularly that AI element. And it's interesting that that goes on from the conversation around digital accessibility as well, because I guess historically, someone living with a facial difference doesn't necessarily experience physical barriers as such. There's not a physical reasonable adjustment that is always needed for someone whose appearance is, I guess, what makes them different, unless there is an impairment attached to that condition, such as a visual impairment. But with the increase of tools for recruitment that are AI-led, there will be physical barriers. For instance, there was a report this year into a recruitment software where 29% of the person's score was based on their facial expression. So lots of facial differences involve an inability to smile, for example, facial palsies, Mebius syndrome. I myself could not blink for a period of time after my car accident. So there are certain facial differences that will impact someone's ability to express themselves. So if such a large proportion of their score as a candidate is based off of facial expression, how is that person supposed to score highly or be kind of taken for their talents and for their suitability for the role if there's an AI recruitment software that uses a video? There are also other areas where there's evidence currently of people being screened out entirely. So AI and facial recognition software relies upon a very narrow data set of what a face should look like, and diverse faces don't always fit within that. So passport gates, for example, and there are cases, there was a World Bank piece of research that found that people with facial disfigurements or albinism, for example, were failing to be given photo ID because their face wasn't registering as a human face. So these are all, I guess, now physical barriers where people may well be screened out of a process, they might be censored, or there may now well be a physical barrier in place by emerging technologies. And we all know, I guess, about the potential for replicating human bias within artificial intelligence as well. So this is a real issue that we at Face Equality International are doing our best to keep on top of. At the moment, we submitted into a report by the UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities at the beginning of the year, which looked at all of the ways in which AI can cause harm to the disability community. And he himself referred to it as the fourth industrial revolution, in which great harm could be kind of inflicted upon the disability community if we let this emerging technology take hold without participative research and without actually listening to people with disabilities about the ways that this will affect them. I'll stop ranting now.
No, that's fascinating. And a really important perspective, that while technology has done many good things for us, it's as with anything else, it can be used for good or, you know, less good. So always something to keep in mind. If anyone else has anything to input on this issue, we can address that, but we do have an audience question as well that we can talk about. And that question in particular is, how do we empower, because so far we've talked about physical disabilities and some kinds of sensory disabilities and facial differences. And so the question from the audience is, how do we empower people to speak, those with invisible disabilities, to speak and ask for help with invisible disabilities, such as mental health? You know, what can we do there, I guess, to make that a more inclusive space?
Yeah, really good.
Oh, I was going to say that's a really good question. And I think it's not an easy one solution answer. I think there's a lot that goes into it. One is kind of destigmatizing invisible disabilities and disabilities in general within the legal profession. I don't think it's a secret that lawyers, you know, have a lot of anxiety, depression, all that stuff. It's very common. It's underreported. But I also think there's some systemic changes too, just entry, you know, the bar. Some bars do ask, you know, have you been diagnosed with a mental health condition within the past, I think it's like 3 years. And so they almost like make it sound like it's a penalizing event when it's not. So I think one is just destigmatizing, changing kind of what our institution thinks about it, but also kind of education about what accommodations might be out there. I have anxiety, and I didn't know that you could ask for just a break and say, I need a break to just step out right now, and you know, take some deep breaths, regulate, come back. I didn't know that that was like something you could ask for. So I think it's education too about what's available.
Thanks. I think that's, I think you're absolutely right on that. Jonathan.
I just had one thing.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
You have to empower yourself first. Understand that your so-called disability does not impact your ability. So empower yourself, and then, as Danielle said, go for the understand what's around you and education.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And you know, I think this is really important discussion actually, and it kind of does actually feed into the general theme here about working together and the collaboration and what we can achieve. And so on this topic, actually, thinking about how we can work together, not just maybe within groups, but also with stakeholders. And a really interesting question that we wanted to put out there really was, how can governments, corporations and organisations work together to ensure greater awareness and create opportunities that could be helping ensure businesses and organisations can continue to adapt and not become complacent, like assuming that, you know, DEI is all done, disability is all done, but keep pushing forward, and recognising that despite the progress we've achieved in DEI, in particular with disability diversity, there is still more to do. Don't know if any of the panel had any thoughts on that.
I can jump in just on the corporation front. I think it's really cool being in-house in a DE&I space, because you're not working just with other lawyers. You're working with, I work with salespeople and business development managers, and also customers. And it's cool to bring in all those perspectives and get this holistic view of how disability affects each one of them, especially our customers, right? Amazon has a monthly call where they review customer feedback around accessibility and what we can do to improve that, which is really empowering. So I think that a collaboration is, hey, how can we help not only the corporations and the government, but the people that they serve? Because it feeds into the holistic view of society.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Danielle. Anyone else had any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that was a really good point. I guess what Danielle was saying about that kind of cross collaboration was really important. And to go back to your original question, I don't think we have the luxury to be complacent, because the job is never done. Like DEI is never done, and positioning it as a government, corporation, organizational, societal priority is never going to, it's never possible for that to end. It needs to be a priority always. And I think what's great here is to understand the leadership and how much progress has been done, particularly by the organizations we've spoken of here today and Reed Smith, but we can't assume that it's the same across the board. And yeah, like we do not have the luxury of becoming complacent.
Yeah, I very much agree. My bad.
Everything's been said, but one thing for sure, each of these stakeholders have a role to play. You talk about governments have a policy, governments creating the laws that everyone needs to follow, whether it's accessibility, whether it's thinking differently. How is that going to be effective? You need the business support. You need to understand the business case of how it's going to be effective. A law, you can make sure everything's accessible, your construction's accessible, but businesses like ours and many other.
We don't have to worry about Christmas shopping. We go with the Chinese way of.
Sorry.
So we've had all of the technical difficulties in our panel.
No, exactly. But
they're trying to silence us.
I was gonna say.
I was just saying about businesses, about everybody has a role. And lastly, as Jane has always said, and as Jane has always said about nothing with us without us. So I guess that's, you have to have the individual voice for who the policy, who the practical business is going to affect. How is it going to impact us? That's the only way that any policy is going to be effective. So all stakeholders have an individual role to play to make sure that it caters to everyone's objectives and needs.
Yes, absolutely. And I think also that point about every stakeholder and who stakeholders are, they're not just other organizations, but also people and collaboration in various different ways. Yes.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but here in the UK, the National Disability Strategy went through several revisions because it was not participative enough. So I think government has a lot to learn from inclusion strategies from businesses, and actually taking leadership from every single kind of sector of the society and holding each other accountable. And I think that was a really good example of when everyone is being held to account. Government is being held to account on ensuring that actually, as Carolyn said from the very beginning of this event, nothing about us without us. So it was very clear that people hadn't been consulted upon and hadn't had their access needs in place in order to be able to participate in consultations. So yeah, it's a responsibility across the board, and everybody needs to be held accountable.
Yes, absolutely. Accountability is a very, very important part of this, and I very much agree. We also just wanted to make sure that our colleagues in Asia were able to be part of this event, and I think you will have heard videos from others in previous panels. We've actually got a short video from Celia Nig, who is part of the team in Asia, and who had wanted to share a few words. So if we could play Cecilia's video, please.
Based on data reported by Asian Pacific governments, persons with disabilities are approximately 2 to 6 times less likely to be employed than persons without disabilities in the region. To promote productive employment and decent work for persons with disabilities in Hong Kong, entities ranging from locally established social enterprises to internationally recognized brands, including Marriott International and Soiree Hotels, all have initiatives which focus on placing persons with disabilities in the workplace. Notably, a local organization, Korea, was established in 2014 in Hong Kong, with a focus to provide job matching services for persons with disabilities. And they have developed a Disability Inclusion Index, which is a comprehensive assessment tool for organizations to build a roadmap of measurable and tangible actions towards workplace disability inclusion. It's definitely encouraging to see organizations in Asia, specifically Hong Kong, step up in recognizing the role of persons with disabilities in the workplace. But is enough being done generally, not only in Asia, given what we know now about how some accommodation can be implemented so easily?
That was Cecilia there, and asking, is enough being done generally around implementation and inclusion, given how easily some of those accommodations actually can be implemented? And I think that's a really important question, and I think also goes to the broader question as well of how is it we can work together to create that inclusive culture with an appreciation for intersectionality and inclusion. And looking to open those doors to a range of talent. So I don't know if any of the panel wanted to comment on any of those points that have been raised.
I would simply say that you can't put a benchmark of what's enough. So I guess we are making progress, and it depends on jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So I commend our Asia team and of how much work they've tried to put in terms of ensuring cultural change. So I guess you can't say there's a barometer of this. Okay, we've achieved. It's about moving the goalposts as you achieve the small goals. So that's what my opinion absolutely is.
Anyone else have any thoughts? Because I think I really much agree with you there, and I do think that it's also about actually recognizing that there can be real benefits actually in terms of those forms of inclusion, and that they often are not particularly costly. I think there's a big concern people often have that it's all going to be very costly and very involve a lot of sort of big procedural and physical changes, and actually a lot of the time it's actually about working smartly and recognizing the benefits and value of inclusion and of actually bringing people into the organization that are going to benefit them as well. So it's really, I think, how we think about this, how we talk about it, and the language we use is also really important. And on this actual theme as well, Andrew, I don't know if you had any thoughts or ideas about that advice and looking towards the future.
I think that many of our panelists have covered have made some great points, and you have as well, Jonathan. And I guess I am just excited to see disability in general becoming more of a topic of discussion in DE&I circles. And I think this discussion just really points out that, and even within that, disability encompasses so much, and it's just really important to keep in mind that even those of us on this panel and moderating this panel have such a variety of experiences, but also contributions and ways that working to help us have a more a better experience will ultimately benefit, a company at large, and not just those people with disabilities.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I very, very much agree on about the benefits people can bring. So we've really discussed an awful lot here. We've discussed the impact of diversity and inclusion and equity groups. We've discussed how digital accessibility can play that role and the importance of doing so in an inclusive way, of that working together and actually of a device and linking towards the future. And I don't know if people might just want to sort of briefly, if they feel comfortable, maybe just a few sort of final points from panelists as to things they think are very important or things that we're taking away from this summit, just before we kind of move to a close. Vaibhav?
Does anybody else want to go first? Okay. So we're looking at advice to the future, and how I think we have made the progress, and we'll hear a lot from our future panelists who I think will give businesses a piece of their mind as to what they want, how they want businesses to be. So I think what I'll take away from this panel is that yes, we've made a lot of progress. Yes, the profession has become accessible. So it's not like you're reaching for the stars and hoping to get the moon. But I think there's more to be done in terms of diversity inclusion as a way of thinking rather than simply being a characteristic that defines you. So I really hope that the audience here and listening on Zoom and my fellow panelists can help in making this crusade of having people to think differently much better for the future.
Absolutely.
I would just chime in and piggyback up for Vaibhav that it's definitely a mindset rather than, a characteristic, but also that collaboration is key. People with disabilities should feel empowered to speak up, but there's a role of allies too to help carry that voice forward. So it's a collaborative effort.
Yeah, I very much agree. Liz, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to.
Yeah, of course. I guess to follow on from what Danielle said, it's like all too often the onus is on the individual to have to kind of take on the burden of having to self-identify or to have to kind of speak up about our needs, and sometimes feel as though our needs are too much. So when we are in a space when people are free to be unapologetically themselves and demand their needs, then we know that we've achieved what we set out to achieve. And I think what stuck with me from a previous panel was about when the percentages of people in the workplace who identify as disabled reflects actually the percentage of the population. And again, so the percentage of people in high level roles who are disabled, again, when that reflects the number of the population, I think that will be an indicator that things are starting to change, is when you see that representation that reflects actually how many people currently have a disability or may well have a disability in the future. Again, recognizing that disability can affect any one of us at any time. So yeah, there's multiple points there.
No, absolutely, and there are an awful lot of points we've discussed, and an awful lot actually to look forward to and to use to drive further equality, while also I think recognising what we've been able to achieve so far. Thank you very much to all of our great panelists in this session. It's been a really, really insightful session, and thank you obviously to Angie for co-hosting as well. And I would really also like now just to say that we've obviously had a number of videos over this summit, and we actually have a video from the charity partner Their World, who is a charity which has been supporting for quite a bit of time, and it does very, very good work around disability and wider inclusion. And so if we could just play a short video from Their World now, that would be wonderful.
The Their World story. We've grown faster and further than we ever thought we would. The thread that binds everything we do is to ensure that every child has the best start in life, a safe place to learn, and skills for the future.
By combining forces, forging partnerships, and setting agendas, we can come together, innovate, and unlock big change.
We're not afraid to push those ideas that can unlock the political will to get behind the global education crisis. And when we campaign, our friends help us make a lot of noise.
Hello! Their World's job isn't done yet. There are so many resources not available to children in different parts of the world.
I do believe the funding, know-how and will exists to educate every child in the world. And Their World has the ideas and the determination to unlock that opportunity for future generations.
There we've just heard about the great work that Their World does, and well, we're proud to support them. I'm just going to hand over now to Georgia and Kevin, who will be moderating the next panel, which is all about looking ahead to the future and how change can be driven by the next generation and how their voice can influence the business environment, and hearing lived experiences and focusing on how organizations must adapt in order to make progress. Very, very true words. So without further ado, I shall hand over to Kevin and to Georgia.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. I'm just going to pause for 1 second just to make sure that all of our panelists are pinned and ready to go. Amazing. I can see Sam, I can see Leah, I can see Kevin. Hi. And Benedicta, fantastic. So just a really, really quick introduction. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much for sticking with us to the third panel. My name is Georgia Crossman, and I'm also in the group in London. And I am joined today by Kevin Harrow, who is counsel the Life Sciences and Health Industries Group in San Francisco here at Reed Smith. And we are both members of the Leaders Group. So we're going to be chairing today's third panel. And we're joined by some absolutely fantastic panelists. And I'm actually going to hand over to them to do a very, very brief 30-second introduction on themselves. And if we could just keep this section really brief, because we are going to come back and sort of hear a lot more from our panelists about their personal experiences. That's going to be sort of the key theme for this panel. So if I could come to you first, Sam, and then maybe Benedicta and then Leah, that'd be great.
Hi everyone, my name is Samantha Rank. I'm a broadcaster and disability rights campaigner. I'm based in central London. I'm here on behalf of TLC Lions, who are an incredible organisation all about bringing lived experience to life and owning that power of the authentic story. I am a white cis female. I am a full-time wheelchair user, and I've got long blonde hair, I've got glasses, and I'm wearing quite a snazzy beret just for you all today.
Thanks, Sam. Could we come to you next, Benedicta, to do a quick intro?
Okay, hi everyone. Just to confirm, can you all hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. I'd written my introduction down, so I'm just going to go ahead and read it. And before my description, I'm a Black woman with short locks and they are colored gold, and I am wearing a circled frame glasses and a white shirt. My name is Benedicta Oyedayo Oyewole, and I'm a 23-year-old woman with disability from Nigeria. I live and work at the intersection of gender identity and expression and disability. And I have cerebral palsy, and which has reduced my mobility and dexterity. And this is the only body I have lived with. I currently work as a diversity and inclusion officer at Women's Health and Equal Rights Initiative, Nigeria. And I'm also a global youth ambassador for Dear World, which we just watched the video together just now. And I identify as an intersectional evangelist. Nice to be here.
Thanks, Benedicta. And if we could just finally come to you quickly, Leah, thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Leah. I am a current second-year law student at the University of California, Davis. And I will be joining Reed Smith in their San Francisco office as a 2023 summer associate.
Thanks so much. And Kevin, did you really quickly want to say hello to everyone before we launch into the personal stories?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We've already heard so many amazing insights from our panelists, and we look forward to hearing from Sam, Leah, and Benedicta, because you represent what the views on the future of DE&I and will set the path going forward. So thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. So after those really quick introductions, it'd be really great if our panelists could share some more background on their lived experiences with us. So how did you become involved in DE&I and why is it so important to you? And if we follow the same order again, if we come to you first, Sam, if that's okay.
Absolutely. So thank you. And thank you again for inviting me here. I was born with a rare genetic condition called osteogenesis imperfecta. It's more commonly known as brittle bones. And I've had over 200 broken bones in my life. I absolutely am an overachiever, but I was born to a family of non-disabled parents. So I guess I came as a rather shock to everybody. And although I was born with a condition that I have lived with all my life and I've learned to adapt to, I was also born with something else other than my condition. I was also born with a label, and that label came from the moment I came into this world. It was a label that was tarnished with really harmful ableist stereotypes. And unfortunately, the world around me gave me not much hope. The label came before the person. And I really tried to live my life negating that harmful label. But it's been a challenge because not only are you battling a systemic world where we do not prioritize, we do not respect disabled people, but much closer to home, my own family really struggled with that label, really struggled with the prognosis, particularly my own father, who felt ashamed, who felt like he was the reason I was born with a disability. And he really struggled with that. He was someone who I absolutely loved, but he stayed at a distance from me because he had this overwhelming sadness about my disability. Unfortunately, my father died suddenly when he was 38 years old of a brain hemorrhage. And I have been told on a number of occasions by family, friends, and relatives that he actually died because he couldn't cope having a disabled child. Now, I've internalized that throughout my life. I felt incredibly responsible for the death of my father. I've internalized my ableism, and I've always felt not good enough. I felt like a burden. That really dramatically changed throughout my adulthood. And although my family didn't stop me from engaging with other disabled people, I definitely felt like they didn't want to go into that that culture because they were scared of that culture. And then one day on the way home from a routine hospital trip, I bumped into a fellow Brittle-bone lady on a train, and we got chatting, and she was just, I fell in love with her. She was so inspirational, and she really challenged what I thought about my own disability. And she encouraged me to become part of the Brittle-bone Society. She said there was an opening for a trustee's post. And after that really random encounter, I actually approached the Brittle-bone Society and I became a trustee for 6 years. And during that period, I met hundreds of other disabled people who empowered me and told me that I shouldn't feel ashamed of my disability. So to answer your original question, why am I in this space? Why is it so important that I'm sharing this story with you? It's because no deaf, disabled or neurodivergent individual should ever feel shame, should ever feel like a burden, whether that's in a workplace, by society, or much closer to home by their immediate family or friends.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks so much for sharing that. And I'm sure that we'll come back to that throughout the questions and sort of draw on the things that you've said. Could we turn to Benedicta next, please? Okay, hopefully we'll have Benedicta back on in a couple of minutes. She's just had a problem with her internet. But in the meantime, can we come to you, Leah?
Hi, everyone. So since birth, I have lived with a visual impairment, which causes me to be legally blind. And I think that's something that a lot of people misunderstand about vision, as especially low vision, is that it's on the spectrum. So I feel like vision, a lot of people see vision as like either you're blind or you're not, but it's actually really a spectrum of visual ability. And so I kind of fall in the middle with having low vision. And which means I have an impaired visual field. And so this is something that I have lived with since birth. And I think I can really share in Sam's experience that my parents, I grew up with two able-bodied parents, and I live with a sister who also is able-bodied. So I felt it was really hard to kind of grow up like that and not really be connected with the community. And so even though I have lived with a visual disability my entire life, I didn't really start becoming involved in advocacy until college and moving to a bigger city for my undergraduate studies. This was really the first time that I had to live independently and navigate a complex higher education system, as well as living in a brand new community. And I feel like this experience really opened my eyes to the structural ableism. For example, a lot of the systems that are aimed at helping individuals or a lot of the systems that individuals with disabilities need to rely on, like public transit, aren't really equipped to help individuals with disabilities. And I think this disparity became very, very apparent to me in undergrad. And then moving to law school, I started to do more hands-on advocacy work. I co-founded with a few other individuals at my law school a disability affinity org called Disability Justice that is aimed at building community for individuals with disabilities at my law school. And kind of going back to the point of why disability advocacy is so important is that it's because disability is something that impacts my everyday day-to-day. It's something that I have to think about daily. I have to plan for daily in every single activity that I do. And so that's why it's so important to me, is because it's something that I have to think about every single day. Living with a disability forces you to consider variables that other able-bodied individuals don't have to think about, such as the ways that financial access and geographical access impact my ability to live independently. being forced to navigate a system that is not disability friendly is incredibly isolating and very exhausting, which is why I'm so passionate about working with the community and within the community to provide greater access to resources for individuals with disabilities.
Thanks so much, Leah. And I think I can see that Benedicta is back on. So if you can hear us, Benedicta, would you be able to give us a quick summary of your personal story as well?
Yeah, sorry, my network got really bad just there, but I'm glad I'm back. I was about to start crying. Yes, so like I said when I was introducing myself, I have cerebral palsy. And funny how this panel discussion came in very timely. Right now in my work, we are having guest and disability mainstreaming training, and I've had to dig into the part of myself that I had not touched in a long time to bring out the experience that I had probably kept locked away somewhere. And one of it is how colonialism and capitalism greatly impacted my acquired disability. At birth, I came with my leg. I came with my leg first, and because of that and mismanagement at the hospital, I acquired cerebral palsy. I'm so sorry about the noise. It's my telephone at the hotel I'm at, and I don't want to stand up to tell it off. Oh my gosh. Okay, so that's the end of the call. So yes, so because of my disability at birth, this is the only body I have lived in, like I've said, and being a person with disability in Nigeria is a very particular issue. Just so you know, 2019 was when Nigeria signed the Discrimination Against Persons with Disabilities Prohibition Act. And from then to now, it's been 3 years, and there has not been any meaningful inclusion and integration of persons with disability into the society. And being a diversity and inclusion officer seems like it was choiceless for me, because when you're navigating a world, when you're navigating structures and systems which does not recognize you or validate your experience in any way, you are forced to survive. And in to survive, you have to put up a fight. And your fight is resistance, your fight is pushing back, your fight is by demanding. And in every sector of the society, you face significant and disproportionate exclusion. And particularly as a woman with disability, and also as a queer woman with disability in Nigeria, I face disproportionate exclusion and marginalization on various bases, which I cannot separate from one another or from one another. So essentially, my finding myself as a diversity and inclusion officer wasn't a choice. It was a form of resistance. It is still a form of resistance. It is a form of survival, and it's also a form of finding community and building joy around my identities.
Thank you so much, Benedicta. And as I said previously, I'm sure that we'll come back to many of those themes throughout the panel. Now I'm going to hand over to Kevin to sort of kick off the questions. That's okay, Kevin.
Thank you, Georgia. Thank you to all of our panelists, because you all spoke so eloquently about the challenges you faced as persons with disabilities, but more importantly, the way that you addressed and overcame a lot of those challenges. So I want to ask you, starting with Leah, how can individuals and organizations better facilitate interaction and increase comfort level on both sides to create an environment fostering openness and collaboration on DEI? And we've heard, a number of panelists, Stuart, Vaibhav, Danielle, talk about DE&I as a mindset rather than, just a box checking exercise. So Leah, I'd like to, ask what ways can you work together with organizations to make this happen?
So I think something that is really important to me is finding is affinity groups. And so as previously stated, I founded a disability affinity group at UC Davis at the law school. And this idea came out of my experience after my first year of law school. And your first year of law school, especially mine, is incredibly difficult. It is a hard experience, but I think what made it even more difficult was not really having a community to connect with individuals with disabilities and feeling very alone and independent, alone and isolated. And so that was really what motivated me to start disability justice at my law school, is to really build a community where individuals with disabilities can be seen and be validated in their experiences. And this goes to the bigger point of the importance of affinity groups. I think that being able to see yourself reflected in, like, to be able to see yourself in the community and to see that there is other individuals that have a disability in the legal profession and are striving towards the same goals that you're working towards, like becoming a lawyer, is incredibly validating. And I think it makes me want to work even harder with my community. And I think that there's also the external impact of having affinity groups. It signals that the group is unapologetically occupying space in an institution in which the population has not been historically represented in. This signals that we're here to stay. There's so many of us, and there's so much power in numbers.
Thank you so much, Leah. And then if Benedicta, you could talk a little bit briefly about the same idea is going forward. What do individuals and organizations need to do to work together to make this happen, to really make this part of our culture?
Okay, if you don't mind, my camera has to be off because the network is quite bad here, and I figured turning it off makes it better. Is that okay?
Absolutely fine. Please go ahead.
Okay, yes. So the closest proximized experience of persons with disability I have is within my context. And with a huge data divide and oversaturation of the digital media, so a dangerous single story of persons with disabilities in the global south have experienced disproportionate challenges with diversity and inclusion in the workplace. Just like I said, I'm currently facilitating ASOGS and disability training and mainstreaming training. And one of the biggest takeaway for me is the power of media towards values clarification and attitude transformation, and to the realization and full integration of persons with disabilities in the various workplaces. And I also think it should cause like a ripple down effect to the socioeconomic realities of persons with disabilities. Because once persons with disabilities are fully integrated in workplaces, and I'm saying this, that effective use and the power of social media, as well as the power of the media generally, not just social media, to tell the full stories of persons with disabilities, just like some people have shared their experiences here, there will be full-on understanding and relatability to persons with disabilities. And then I think the question itself goes beyond confirmation. It is about removing the barriers that limit persons with disabilities and terms persons with disabilities and as unfit, and also making intentional and reasonable accommodation in the workplaces for persons with disabilities. And the other side, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable and saying the inclusion of persons with disabilities in workplaces as a right, and it is not negotiable, as a non-negotiable right. And also actively listening to persons with disability for the realization and integration of persons with disabilities in workplaces, and to move diversity, equality, and inclusion policies from paper into action. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Benedicta. In the interest of time, we're actually going to move on to the next question, but we're going to come straight to you, Sam, if that's okay. So if I can ask you, how do you think we can bring issues and thoughts around diversity and disability to the forefront to create opportunity to the next generation?
I think personally, we still go down a path of dehumanizing and marginalizing disabled people, and I think that's where we go wrong. We can talk a lot about policy change, we could talk about the importance of equity versus equality, and we could talk about this cultural shift that ultimately we're wanting to aim for. But actually, we need to take a step back and recognize that until we see disabled people as human beings who want to be respected, that want to be loved, that want friendship groups, that want opportunities in life, then we won't actually achieve anything. I experience this on a daily basis through things like microaggressions. Just yesterday, I stopped somebody. I was out with my PA, and my PA is my support assistant, someone that I pay by the hour. They are there as an employee. And although I stopped and asked this individual for directions, this individual ignored me and wouldn't even give me eye contact. They actually looked at my PA and gave her the directions. And I think, you know, this is something that we all have to stop and challenge and say that we have to unlearn and relearn, and that we are all guilty of unconscious bias. And before we actually I'm often quoted saying, leave our egos at the door. Before we actually do that, we will still get into a case where you know, deaf, disabled, and neurodivergent people will still mask or code switch or cover up their disability. I've done this on numerous occasions. I've gone into work with fractures. I've not been vocal on my needs, and that is purely because I'm scared of being treated differently. So, you know, recognize that disabled people are simply that. We're human beings at the end of the day, and we need to start from there before we get too ahead of ourselves.
Thanks so much, Sam. Leah or Benedicta, did either of you have anything that you wanted to add to that before we move on to our disability etiquette and awareness section?
I can go ahead and speak. I think one thing too about receiving accommodations, one thing we need to think about is the way making sure that accommodations and resources are made available to individuals. In the past, at academic institutions I've attended, I've never really been provided a list of what accommodations the school is willing to provide. And I have to learn about what accommodations the school has or is willing, like, is equipped for through word of mouth. And I think that that's unfortunate. And I think one thing we also need to look at is the way that distribution of accommodations can also create inequity. For example, at the law school, individuals who receive accommodations have to test at a different building than people who don't receive accommodations. And the building is not anywhere near the law school. It's quite far, and it's a new environment. And it's also incredibly isolating, taking a final away from your peers. And I think that that's something that we also need to think about, is the way that distribution of accommodations, making them more equitable and not creating inequities.
Yes, I think added to what Samantha and Leah had said, I think we can create laws and policies around inclusion and disability. However, we cannot legislate attitudes. So for this diversity and inclusion to work, we need to all, as a society, as a country, as a community, move towards an unquestioned understanding that the lives of persons with disabilities are worth living.
Thanks so much, Benedicta, and thanks, Leah. And as I mentioned before, we're now going to quickly move on to our disability etiquette and awareness section. I think it would be great to come to you first, Leah, if you don't mind, and then we can move on to see if Sam or Benedicta have anything else to add. But how do you approach difficult conversations and sensitive topics around disabilities with the objective of increasing disability awareness and being able to dispel the fear from both sides whilst reframing our thinking about ability? How do you think that we can work to change the perceptions of people with disabilities at every stage of their career? I know that's quite a long question, sorry. If you need me to repeat any of it, please let me know.
Thank you. I think a piece of advice that I have received from a mentor that has really stuck with me is that to approach every conversation as a learning opportunity. I used to not really want to have difficult conversations, or I used to kind of not really even advocate for myself, but being able to view every conversation as a learning opportunity is something that I stick with. And to me, that means that understanding that people are at different places in unlearning harmful systems, and some people get there quicker than others, but it just matters that people are willing to learn and be present and engage in those conversations. And I know this is a point that's been really reiterated, but it's important to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, and just having these conversations is a step in the right direction.
Absolutely. And if I can just echo on that, I often hear from my non-disabled peers that they don't want to offend or put their foot in it. So instead of engaging with disabled people, they step back and they simply don't, which for me is a form of toxic positivity, because what you're saying is I'm further going to oppress and marginalize you because I feel uncomfortable, and I am going to cover this up and wrap it in a bow by telling you I didn't want to offend you. And you know, we've spoken about this already today. There's not one disabled person who would rather be further marginalized than have someone use the incorrect language, say something that is perhaps a little bit uncomfortable, but just open those conversations up. Like I said before, you know, we are human beings, and I myself, I make mistakes. I'm learning about other members of society. I'm learning about other protected, marginalized groups of society and their own life and lived experience. And I don't always get it right. So why would you assume that disabled people would absolutely take offense if you are on a learning journey yourself? I can't see that happening. But also, you know, disabled people are not a monolith. We are, you know, we are different individuals, and not all of us are angelic, lovely human beings. And you might come across one or two grumpy disabled people who might get a little bit upset with you, but on the whole, I would say we are all really open to everyone and that learning journey.
Thanks so much, Sam. I think that is such a good point, and talk about that all the time with people when I'm discussing I have a hidden disability, and I would way rather that someone tried than didn't say anything at all, even if it's the wrong thing in their mind. Benedicta, did you have anything to add to that?
I think Samantha earlier has made like really valid and great points. I just want to talk about interrogating the privilege that comes with politification of languages, because we find out that languages are very political, and the political is very personal. So I think persons with disabilities, just as we are willing and able to extend grace to members of the society, we are also people, and that grace extension should also, just like the social model of persons with disabilities and how the society keeps reinforcing disabled, ableist terms on us, there should also be a point where society also comes together and have the conversation amongst themselves and say, persons with disabilities have been talking, have we been listening? So in as much as languages are politicized and the political is personal, there also needs to be that constant reassurance and also fact checking and checking in within ourselves or our societies about how these languages we are using on persons with disabilities has a ripple effect and affectance on them, as well as the interrogating privilege that comes with languages. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Benedicta. Again, really, really interesting. And I'm just going to hand back over to Kevin now.
Thank you, Georgia. You know, I'd like to, this sort of segues nicely into our next question, Sam, about forging relationships and bridging gaps with allies and why that's so important. And in a way, sometimes it's important for people with disabilities to sort of, as you said, take the first step or to have empathy or include those who do not. I just, if you could talk briefly about why that's so important for allyship and why that matters for DE&I.
Absolutely, thank you. So it's so funny how society can view disabled people, and I have a little story about my own relationship with my sister who is non-disabled, and it recently came out that she is jealous of me. She's jealous that as a child I received a lot of attention, that I was in hospital a lot, which meant that she didn't have, you know, the support necessarily that she felt as a child. And that resentment has built up. And now we're at a stage, don't worry, we're very, very close. And I love my sister dearly. But we are at a stage in our lives where we are having really open and honest conversations, partly because we are both having therapy, which I encourage anyone, if you are in a privileged position to go for therapy, absolutely do it. But it's given us that you know, power to have these honest conversations. And it's really funny because she, you know, saw me as this burden. She saw me as someone that was taking attention away from her, and on the flip side, as a woman with a disability, a physical disability, who would love to be a mother, really would love to be a mother. I used to be a high school teacher, but it's different when it's not your own children. And I might not be able to have my own children naturally. And if I do, it may put a really strain on my physical well-being. And my sister has got 3 beautiful children, and it dawned on me that, you know, we can often view a situation or an individual in a certain way without actually stepping back and having empathy and seeing them as an individual and stripping away, like I said earlier, all these labels. So I think for me, my message is, you know, take each individual as that, simply that, as an individual, and don't always necessarily jump to conclusions about who they are or what they are. Talking on a wider scale, you know, we need to start talking positively about reasonable adjustments. We need to understand that making reasonable adjustments is not simply a nice thing to do or morally the good thing to do. It's actually in legislation. And disabled people, when they ask for these things, they aren't asking for anything that is special or additional. Coming to work and being able to actively do their job with equipment that is there for them, their needs, is not asking for additional services. So I think it's important. The pandemic has absolutely shown us and highlighted that, you know, we can think in a less linear way, but we need to work together as a team and really build on those allyship partnerships.
Thank you, Sam. That was extremely well put. I'd like to just have us play a video from our Leaders Asia group, just talking about some of the ideas that they've had, and then we'll come back to our panelists to wrap up. But we just like to play a short video here from Annabelle.
Disability in itself is not a complex concept to understand. People are different, with different biological makeup, and that creates a different experience of the world that we are born into. When disability is mixed into the workplace, however, a more complicated dynamic is seen. Oftentimes, what occurs is that in society, and naturally the workplace, recognises the medical model of disability. That is, the focus that disability is something which resides within the individual, something which results from impairment, and the solution of which is to change the person to fit into the characteristics of society and the workplace. But what is neglected is recognition of the role that the social environment has in disabling persons who are different. In fact, it is the misunderstanding that those with disabilities are inherently disadvantaged that leads to the implicit ignoring of their true abilities. And it is, indeed, a misunderstanding. Persons with disabilities are intelligent and capable, and some perform exceptionally. For instance, Albert Einstein, the very man who devised the theory of relativity, was believed to be autistic. I hope workplaces may start to be more proactive in considering how to cater to disabled persons, and not wait until a disabled person seeks assistance due to a lack of reasonable accommodations available to them. Differences are a part of human diversity. Adopting and accepting changes in the workplace not only makes the office environment more interesting, but crucially targets the importance of respecting human dignity and inclusivity. Instead of only focusing on assimilating disabled persons to the social norm, workplaces may start to learn more about disabilities to structure their offices and policies with the diversity of its employees in mind. Should persons with disabilities be asked to adapt to a world which was not planned, developed, and built with them in mind? Or should society be adapting to be more accommodating? And are these ideas necessarily conflicting?
Amazing. So just to wrap things up, it'd be really great to hear from our panelists on one or absolute maximum 2 tips that you think you can provide that are really useful, that you've learned from your own experiences, and that can be done to help to accommodate those with disabilities, particularly from other people towards you, if that makes sense. Sorry, I should have specified. Leah, do you mind if we come to you first?
Yes, I think one thing for me is just making sure that if you are going to provide resources, or you should be providing resources for individuals with disabilities, you should make those resources apparent, and B, make sure that they're easy to access, that you have a streamlined accommodation process, and that if you do receive accommodations, make very clear that it's not going to impact your place. It's not going to impact your workplace and your future at that place of employment.
Amazing, thank you. And if we come to you next, Benedicta, have you got a tip that you'd like to share?
Yes, I have quite a tip. Few tips I've written down, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to run through. And I think for me is the concept of intersectionality, which has been spoken a lot in the conversations we've been having in the panel session today. And it is looking at the disabled issue or persons with disability as persons with multiple dimensions and people with multiple identities, because as Audre Lorde said, we do not live a single issued life. And I think with that intersectional lens, we are going to lean towards inclusive, transformative advocacy change towards diversity and inclusion in workplaces for persons with disabilities in their diversities, and for structural, systematic, as well as for sustainable, fundamental and foundational solution to the issues around full integration of persons with disabilities within the workplaces. And there is also actively listening to persons with disabilities. There's this thing we say in Nigeria, which is persons with disabilities, and I don't think it's just Nigeria, I think all over, persons with disabilities have been talking, but have people been listening? And I didn't mention anything about ILIG, but for organizations to want to integrate persons with disabilities in their workplace, there's an intentional effort towards listening, actively listening to persons with disabilities, even before the formation of their diversity and inclusion policies, and ensuring that there is a constant update of these policies and laws, and also a translation of that policies from paper to action, as well as safeguarding policies for persons with disabilities within workplaces, and also all of this from an intersectional lens and through intersectional approaches. Over to you, Sam.
Thank you, Benedicta. There is a lovely expression that goes like this: if you've met one disabled person, you've met one disabled person. So I hope that resonates with everybody today. Disabled people are living in a disabling world, and we're disabled by the barriers of the world. Attitudinal barriers, information and communication, and physical barriers. And we want allies to remove those barriers and work with us. So I think in the essence of symmetry, because I know it's been mentioned a few times today, but nothing about us without us is a universal motto, and this echoes everything that has essentially been discussed today. And if you can take that into your heart and remember that when you're talking about diversity and inclusion, then you won't really go far wrong.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Leah. Thank you, Benedicta. You were all fantastic. Do we have time to play the next video, or should we go directly to Tamara and Joanne?
I think we'll do it at the end, Kevin, if that works for everyone. So if we save that for now, and then after we've done the next section, we'll come back to that video and hear from them.
Yes. Thank you.
Amazing. So I think because we're now not having that video, we're now skipping a section which we will come back to later. But I think if I can welcome Tamara up here to do the next section, which is the Reflection Awards, that would be brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you, Georgia. And thank you all. This has been a fantastic session today, and I've been delighted to get to be here. So I'm Tamara Box. I'm our managing partner for Europe and Middle East. And most importantly, I have the privilege of being our senior management team sponsor for our Leaders Business Inclusion Group. In planning for this year's summit, we wanted to reflect on the history of disability inclusion, and in particular, celebrate our 10 years anniversary of our Disability Inclusion Group leaders, while also, as you've heard, looking into the future and how we can continue to make a difference. As part of this process, we decided to recognize some of the wonderful heroes that have helped us to reach this point, as well as some of the rising stars who are shaping the future of disability inclusion. And that's what led to the Reflection Awards segment of today's summit. And it's also what we'd like to now do. We want to take some time to both thank and recognize some of these amazing people who've committed so much to the progress of disability equity and inclusion. So first up are our Heroes Awards. And we are so excited and really delighted to get to recognize each of Jane Burton, Paul Wilden, and Stuart Pixley for their ongoing support of disability inclusion. I'm going to start with Jane, who is amazing. She's the immediate past chair of the Disabled Solicitors Network and a member of the Law Society's Equality, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee. Since Reed Smith first formed our Disability Business Inclusion Group back in 2012, Jane has been standing beside us and supporting our efforts all the way. She's a tireless campaigner for the inclusion of people with disabilities within the profession And it is very clear that without Jane, lawyers with disabilities would not have been given all of the opportunities that they deserve and which have opened up. Jane is wonderfully here with us in London, and I'd love to invite her to say a few words. All over to you, Jane. Yeah, please do. Absolutely.
I'm completely blown away. You recognize me like this. I think what you're doing at Reed Smith and we continue to do is be inclusive and listen, and nothing about us without us goes without saying. You asked Lawyers with Disabilities Division as we were. We've now morphed into the Disabled Solicitors Network. You asked us right from the start what you should be doing. And I think that made a real change and a real difference. I'm incredibly pleased to be here today to celebrate with you and to know that you're still doing it, that it's not a tick box exercise, that you mean it. And, you know, I live in York, so I've come a long way to do this. I just wish more firms could be like you. I do think it's spreading though, with the work of Legally Disabled, the report from Cardiff University Business School with Debbie Foster did with Lawyers with Disabilities Division made a big difference. And I think everyone should read that. I tell everyone that. So, but thank you very much. I'm very touched. And thank you for all your work.
Thank you.
And keep doing it.
Thank you. Okay, go right ahead. Thank you. There's your award.
So much. Gosh, thank you.
Thank you. And together we will keep making
Yeah,
a
I'm
difference
sure
and get
we
more
will.
firms to come along with us.
Yeah,
For sure.
I'm sure you will.
Thank you. So I tell you about our next hero, Paul Wilden. Paul is the trustee and board member for Face Equality International, and you will have heard earlier from Felida about that, as well as being a founding member of the Singapore Business Network on Disability, where he's been able to share his expertise, his experience, and his networks to help advance the equitable inclusion of those with disabilities. I think Paul is with us virtually, though I cannot see. Paul, if you're here,
yes. Hello.
Jump
Good
in and
evening.
please join us.
Hi, Tamara. Well, my immediate reaction is wow. Thank you so very, very much. I'm honoured and humbled. I did not see this coming at all. I guess with hindsight, when I was seeing the various emails coming through asking me if I was going to be there today, now I can connect the dots in terms of there was clearly something going on in the background that I didn't pick up on. So first, thank you very, very much for this. It is, well, I guess I'm accepting this not just on behalf of myself, but I think Face Equality International. I think on behalf of Felida, who was speaking earlier, and everybody at FEI, we owe you our heartfelt thanks for all of the amazing work you've done for us to help us move our agenda forward and our story forward. The Singapore Business and Network on Disability that you've referenced, you'll have heard me mention many, many times that I focus on the ability in disability. And I can't say that that was my idea. That came from the SBNOD, and we very consciously, when we first started out, decided to capitalize the A and to make a point of focusing on the ability. I loved what Stuart said earlier in terms of thrive, not survive, and that really resonated with me. And if Stuart doesn't mind, I want to use that because that really, really, I think is such a powerful 3-word statement. I think all of the work that you're doing at Reed Smith with leaders and beyond is amazing. I think you all deserve a Heroes Award because of what you've been doing for the last 10 years. Please keep on doing what you're doing. I'm so sorry I'm not there this evening with you. And I look forward to celebrating with you all in terms of all the great work that you've been doing for leaders and beyond is in the very near future. So thank you. I'm a little bit tongue-tied because I just didn't see this coming at all. So thank you very, very much.
You're very welcome, Paul, and thank you. And we know where to find you, so we'll get that award to you as well.
Thank you.
And Stuart can now answer you. And I want to tell you, you've heard about Stuart. You obviously heard Stuart earlier. He kindly joined us, and he's clearly a champion for diversity at Microsoft. As you heard, worked on various disability awareness projects at Microsoft, and is also a member of the Washington State Bar Association Committee for Diversity and a board member of the Alliance of People with Disabilities. So Stuart, I hope you are still with us, and you can tell Paul whether he can use your phrase, but also, please join us and accept it.
Hey, thanks a ton. I'd also joined Paul. I was like, wow, I had no idea this was happening. If I had, I suppose I might have, dressed up a little more, but then you wouldn't be getting my true, authentic self. So there you go. Thanks a ton. I'm so privileged to have been a part of this 2-3 years now. I keep on coming away from this thinking, well, what would my life have been like if Reed Smith had been around, if this had been where I grew up, and people would be, knowing that there are firms out there who wanted me precisely because I brought, a different perspective. And I think, if anything is my theme, you guys know it's this community and the way that we connect. And so thanks to Reed Smith for being at the forefront of that, particularly in our profession. And, and not only is it important to you guys because you do it, annually, but you've done this so many years in a row. And of course, 10 years is phenomenal. That sort of commitment is super important for getting us all where we need to go. And the other thing that's unique and special is that you guys do this across, UK and US and Asia. I don't see that happening anywhere else. And it's so important for people with disabilities to be to be connected to, of course, their local communities. But understanding that this is a global phenomenon is super powerful, is super compelling, and you guys are the one group that is sewing this all together. So I am super excited to figure out what you guys are going to do for the next 10 years. That's going to be fantastic, and I can't wait, and I hope I get to participate. So thanks an absolute ton.
Thank you, Stuart. And of course, we know where to find you too, so we will make sure you get your award, but thank you. We'll move on to our Rising Star Awards. So we'd also like to thank and recognize and appreciate Vibhu Sharma, Rachel Amos, and Danielle Liebel for the difference that they have already made and that we know they're going to continue to make in the disability diversity space. We can see that they are going to have a huge impact on the future. So Vibhu, I am not sure if she's here, but let me tell you a little about Vibhu. She's fantastic. She is a campaigner and disability and inclusion expert with Their World and a co-chair of the Global Partnership for Disabilities Youth Council. Among many of her achievements includes that she has supported the disability inclusion agenda by drafting the reasonable accommodations guidance for hiring managers for employees with disabilities, as well as helped reporting on the UN disability inclusion strategy. Vibhu, are you with us? Okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can, Vibhu. Fantastic.
Oh, hi. I am very much here, and I'm very emotional at this stage, and I'm spellbound because I definitely did not see it coming. I was on vacation for last 2 weeks, and I was not looking at my emails at all. I mean, I was looking at them, but particularly in the last 2 days, I did not look at them. And just 2 hours before the session started, I received a message on my phone from my boss at Their World, Justin Van Fleet, saying, listen, Reed Smith wants you to attend the session. Will you be able to attend it? And I was like, yeah, sure, I will. And that's when I realized I had a bunch of emails that I had received in the last 2 days In short, I'm sorry. I know that the software is asking me to turn on my video, but I won't be able to because, as I said, I just returned from vacation this morning. My apartment is in a mess. I'm in mess. I'm not very pleasant to look at. But I'm really very grateful to ReadSmith for thinking of me, and I had been a panelist for the last couple of sessions with ReadSmith, and each time we do this, at the end, I only feel that the disability inclusion agenda is going onwards and upwards, and I think it's really worth appreciating that ReadSmith is not just preaching, but they are also practicing what we talk about in every disability and inclusion session. And what I greatly appreciate about ReadSmith and the way the whole disability inclusion agenda is approached is the fact that you guys really believe in listening to people who have disabilities and listening to young people, because obviously well, we say nothing about us without us, and that's also the reality that no one understands our needs better than we do, and listening to us is important, and at ReadSmith we are definitely doing that. So I am tongue-tied because, as I said, it was unexpected. But thanks so much, and I definitely look forward to continuing our many collaborations and working more with ReadSmith in whatever capacity I can. To support the disability inclusion agenda that does not belong to just one of us here in this room or in the virtual room, but all of us. So thanks so much. I'll stop here. Thanks.
Thank you, Fabi. That's fantastic. Thank you. And I'm sorry we shocked you, but I'm so glad you were able to join us straight from your...
You shocked and surprised me first on email. I mean, it's like, okay, there were 24 emails. Not all of them were from ReadSmith, but at least 4 of them were. And then I received a message on my phone. Listen, are you going to be attending this? I was like, yeah, sure, I will.
Fantastic. Well, we'll thank Justin.
Thank you. It was such a pleasant surprise. I think, yeah, you made my ear, I should say. Thank you.
Good. Onwards and upwards. Well, I'm going to move on to another of our wonderful rising stars, Rachel Amos. Rachel is a director and trustee for Support Send Kids, which supports SEND children with access to support and education. She has wonderfully developed what she calls the Noddy Guide, but it really is a guide to all of the issues, legal and otherwise, needed to assist special needs children in accessing schooling and education. She provides loads of guidance on SEND law generally and has been a fantastic support. Rachel, are you with us?
Yeah, I'm here, Tamara. Thank you for asking me. I've never expected to be a rising star, and certainly not at 52. So who knows? That was quite a surprise. I'm very flattered that you think I've got further to go, and I'm hoping to go some of that distance with ReadSmith, as you know. Just a word for everybody to tell you what we've been doing. We've been basically harnessing the power of the legal community to help put out truthful information to families who have children with special educational needs and disabilities around their rights in education. And we did that publishing the Noddy Guide. It's the guide produced by 2 amazing barristers from Matrix and Landmark Chambers. And they've been doing that for the last 15 years, but we turned it into 140 Q&A and put it on our website. And then about 3 weeks ago, we published our Disability Discrimination in Education Guide. And that is really the first of its kind. And I'm super excited about that. And I've been listening to some of the sessions this afternoon and some of the discussion around data, some of the discussion around information and about, you know, people knowing what they're entitled to. And that's kind of absolutely in what we're doing. We're trying to give that information out to people young enough, starting at school, so that by the time they get into the workplace, they can prove that they can succeed if they have an adjustment, or I think I've learned today the American word is accommodation. And we have great big goals, enormous plans for global domination in terms of putting together a great big data set that means that we will prove that inclusivity is good business.
Fantastic. See, your star is definitely rising. I know that there's lots more you're going to do, and it is exciting to hear about it. Thank you so much, and congratulations. We know where to find you too, Rachel, so we'll get your award to you.
Thank you so much.
And I'm going to move on to the wonderful Danielle, who you've all heard from today and who joined us on our panel. She was previously an associate at Reed Smith, so we know up close and personal how fantastic she is. She's a Special Olympic athlete in swimming and golf. She served on the board of directors for Special Olympics Minnesota. She also started Differ Abilities Experience, a nonprofit that provides friendship and inclusion building opportunities to students. Danielle, I hope you're still with us. We certainly want to get a chance to thank and recognize you.
I am, and I'm so blindsided, but now I actually just checked my email and I got a email from the lovely David Boucher saying, hold on, stay on. I'm like, yeah, I'd love to catch up. So it's an honor. Reed Smith was my first home and will forever be my home law firm. Leaders is such a great group and has made such a big impact on me. So much so that whenever, you know, at AWS, we talk about law firms to partner with. I'm like, Reed Smith. So the impact has not gone unnoticed. So thank you again.
Thank you, Danielle. You're a star. Well, look, I know you all want to join me in thanking our fabulous awardees, Jane, Paul, Stuart, Vaibu, Rachel, and Danielle. We've been delighted to have you all in our corner in all of our efforts too. So thank you. And I'm handing over to fantastic. Back to the lovely Georgia.
Thanks, Tamara. So we were actually hoping that Joanne could quickly introduce the Sports Aid video, but I don't think they're going to have time to pin her. So if we could quickly play the Sports Aid video, which is our final video for today, and then we can pin Joanne, who's going to do the closing words for today's summit. Thank you.
I brought her to swimming to be safe around water and to go on holiday and be safe. Someone introduced her to competitive swimming and it's progressed.
It definitely does boost your confidence when you swim and then finish the race and look around.
It's great to see her face when she gets on really well. It's great to see the amount of friends she's made. Swimming sort of allowing her to be herself. There's that bit, I know I'm disabled, but I'm going to prove you all that I can do this. I run her everywhere, I take her everywhere, every single night virtually out of the house. It's very, very time consuming. It's an absolute pleasure to do it. The funding that she's been given, it's just a great relief. She can get everything she needs without you having to think, can I afford this, can I do it?
It gives us support so he can come to competitions with me.
She now goes away on a couple of the GB camps. She's going to see the higher level of coaching up there.
It is different coaching somebody with a disability. You quickly forget about that. Just think about the person, what they can do. If Ellie can be independent, she will be. We're hoping that she can go all the way to the Paralympics.
There's a lot of kids that she inspires and there's a lot of kids that absolutely love her.
It inspires them to get to see me swim.
And what she does can make a lot of other meningitis sufferers quite proud.
Hello, I'm Joanne Christopher. I'm the Senior Human Resources Manager at Reed Smith and the HR Liaison to our Leaders Disability Group. In closing, we hope that you enjoyed our 3rd Annual Disability Summit and that you each have information you can take away and put into practice to help with your disability inclusion efforts. We'd like to congratulate our well-deserving award recipients. Your achievements shine the light on the difference that one person or one company can make in disability awareness and inclusion. We would especially like to thank our panelists for their time and expertise, our moderators, and in particular, Vaibhav Adlaka and Georgia Crossman, who took the rowing oar in putting together today's summit. Our theme of past, present, and future disability inclusion so fittingly aligns with the 10th anniversary of Leaders, our disability inclusion group. Thank you for participating with us and for all that you do to expand the opportunities for individuals with disabilities, both personally and professionally. A recording of today's presentation will be made available to you in the near future. This concludes our 2022 Disability Summit. Thank you.